I heard you guys like won a football game or something. I literally knowing I was coming, I was watching Super Bowl. I thought to myself, "Oh, they're going to be so happy." I'm no offense to Jalen Hurts, and he wouldn't care what I think, but I think Vince Lyon was the MVP. That was pretty amazing. So congratulations to all of you. Today on the Amtrak coming in. So I'm living in New York City at the moment. I'll tell you a little bit about that. On the Amtrak coming in, literally every single time the conductor said, "The next stop is Philadelphia." He said, "The next stop is Philadelphia, home of the world champion." Philadelphia Eagles. It was so great. He was so happy to announce it. In 10 minutes, we're going to be in Philadelphia. Home of the world champion. It was just totally great. Ryan and I met when he was at First Presbyterian Church in Ambler, and we did some work, about 3 years of work there, where we just in and out doing lots of stuff about bringing change. And when I heard that Ryan was coming here and he asked me if I'd come down, I immediately jumped on the opportunity. I live most of the time in California. I have a little house in Altadena, California. Have you heard about that? Our house was spared, actually. Two of my neighbors' houses were not. Our fence caught on fire. So we literally have it's been rented for the last year because I've been in New York, and my renter literally came out, took a video and said, "Somebody put this fence out, like our fence, which is like literally, it's a 5-foot setback from the house. Somebody put it out, and they left the hose running. And my nephew, the firefighter, said, "Oh, that was a firefighter." So they've been going house to house checking, saw something on fire, put it out, and just left the water going. And so it's probably saved our house. I mean, without question. So it's really remarkable. I literally was going through. I was in Detroit, and my license still says Altadena on it, California. And she literally goes, "Altadena, California." And the TSA person said, "We're all praying for Altadena." Which the sweetest, like the sense of how tragedy brings you together, right? So we haven't won a Super Bowl, but we did have that. So my wife and I live in New York City right now. For 1 year, we're in New York. My wife is an artist. She was accepted into the New York Academy of Art, Tribeca. And so she has been doing this intense art. So two 60-year-olds and a 100-pound dog in an Upper West Side apartment. Having just a great year. We're both trying to be very creative. She's working in oils. I'm working in carbohydrates. It's been a really good season there together. So every day I get to basically, because I travel and I work on remotely and I run this consulting company and I still have some doctoral students. Every day basically I work with leaders going through change. That's what I do. I say this stage of my life, the great joy is I am never in a meeting I don't want to be in. People look at me like I'm magical when I say that. Like, how did you figure that one out, right? And it's interesting because I'm every single time I am in really interesting conversations with really the diverse body of Christ. I mean, I'm a Presbyterian. I have deep roots and 37 years, 40 years of being a Presbyterian, right? I like deep roots in it. But I work with like 3 types of Presbyterians now, and 2 types of Anglicans, and 4 types of Baptists, and now 2 types of Methodists, and 3 different global charismatic and Pentecostal denominations, and universities and nonprofits, and we're working with Young Life and Salvation Army and Wycliffe, and all these places. I talk to people who do not talk to each other. Because what we have in common is we're all trying to figure out how to faithfully navigate this changing world, and how to have this ministry that touches us, like this congregation where we have a history and a part of that. How can that touch other people's lives? And so the entire conversation of leadership and change is really where I get to live. So what I'll do today is we're going to spend just until noon. We're going to basically have kind of 2 conversations around how do you lead in a changing world. And for the first part, I'll be doing more of the talking. And as we get to the later in the morning, you'll do more talking. So, and that means you'll be talking to people at your table. So if you don't want to talk to these particular people, now's a good time. Now's a good time to get a bagel and some coffee and sit somewhere else, and nobody will notice. Nobody will notice whatsoever. So, but let me just start with a couple of kind of opening thoughts. I have been going around the country for the better part of 20 years, quoting my favorite quote on leadership. Leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. And this is what they didn't tell you when you signed on to be on session, right? They didn't tell you that you would literally become the reciprocal for everybody's disappointment in the church. We're not doing this, we're not doing that, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. By the way, have you guys thought of this? Don't you guys know what you're doing? Right? Like it's all of a sudden you're in that spot. And what's interesting about it is this, I like this definition as much as it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, is that it actually is the experience of leading. And it also helps us understand the distinction in the scriptures about leading. So leadership is actually hard to define out of the Bible. I have a PhD in systematic and practical theology. It's really hard to create a theology of leadership out of the Bible. You can't look it up in the concordance and look up all the verses. And people have tried, and almost every time it kind of rings hollow. The best way to understand leadership is with a different biblical category. And the biblical category that's all over the scriptures is the category of management. Except in the scriptures, it's called stewardship. Right? Stewardship. If you take care of the things entrusted to your care, as my colleague Scott Cornwood says, and pass them on to other trustworthy people, you've been a faithful steward. Well done, good and faithful servant, right? You've been a faithful steward. Paul even describes the work of evangelism as being stewards of the mysteries of God. The things that you have heard from me, entrust to faithful people who will entrust them to other people. The stewardship. When I was a senior pastor for 17 years, it seemed like every 18 months I was looking for a new youth leader. I now understood that I was actually looking for a youth manager. You take 10 kids to camp, you got to bring 10 kids home. And they got to be the same 10 kids, right? Because they're entrusted to your care. That was the whole point. The manager is always someone who people appreciate because managers get a plan accomplished, or they take chaos and they bring order to it, or they know how to set up all the equipment and take care of it the way the folks did for me this morning. Like managers, people really appreciate most of the time. The manager tells Moses on the other side of the Red Sea, hey, that parting the sea trick, that was huge. We should talk about that every week over dinner. Right? I've checked the maps, and the maps say that it'll take us about 6 weeks of hard marching to get to that place called the Promised Land. The leader knows it's going to be 40 years, and not everybody's going to make it. That's why I say the leaders are always the chief disappointment officer. Regardless of your role, you're going to end up having to help people work through their disappointed expectations. Because leadership is ultimately about transformation, energizing a community of people toward their own transformation. What leadership is required when, in order to do the thing that God's called us to do, we're going to have to become more than who we are at the moment. We are loved just as we are. Let's be really clear. We're loved just as we are. But to be able to step into and accomplish the mission that God's given us, we're going to have to be transformed. That's at the heart of the leadership challenge. And this kind of leadership that I talked about, called adaptive leadership, at the heart of it is transformation. And that's really where we're going to spend most of our time. And what I want to talk about today with you is, all I want to do is give you some language for as you're going about taking on the challenges of being a session. On occasion, you'll be able to say, oh, wait a second, here's some tools that will help us take on the kind of challenge that will require us to be transformed. And I want to give you some shortcuts, just some hacks for, when I see this, we should think about this, or have this kind of conversation, or use this language. And pretty soon what you'll realize is it becomes a second nature. And to be honest, you have an incredibly good pastor at this. Ryan actually helped our company in this way. We had a whole way of structuring it, and we're doing some work with it that was doing really, really well in part of the church where Ryan's hand was involved and was struggling in other parts. And when I started asking Ryan, I said, why do you think it's doing well over here where you're working on it? He goes, because I work with our session on this all the time. So we literally changed our approach to now work more with sessions because of what we learned working with Ryan. You have a really, really good pastor who understands this stuff, is really good at working on it, and also has learned a lot about the way in which this applies in the setting. So you're in a really good place, so it's fun to do this. So we're going to jump in. Is that okay? Okay? And then along the way, let me just say, if you have any questions along the way, we're not a big enough room to worry about that. I get rolling. I sound like a preacher. I get it. You're waiting for the poem. But if you just want to like raise your hand or interrupt, it's really okay with me. Okay? It's really great. Okay. Let me just give you a way to think about this. So there was this guy named Charles Handy. So my life has now lived at the intersection of Christian theology and spiritual formation and organizational literature. So if Harvard Business Review and John Calvin were publishing something together, that's really where I spend a lot of my life. Okay? Charles Handy did this thing where he talked about the life cycle of a company. He did it with corporations. Some of you in business will probably have seen this diagram before. It's used everywhere. It's really basically says this, and then we took it and we adapted it to organizational life. And in every conversation we've had, we've been able to change some of the labels, but it's the exact same principle. And what Charles Handy was basically doing is saying this: if you have a company, you start a business, you start an organization, you start the YMCA, you start a church, whatever it is. If you start, it has this curve. This is its life cycle, and that curve is if it's healthy and doing fine. In other words, nobody's done anything wrong here. There's nothing about this curve that makes you say, oh, we have a problem. Nobody ran off with the secretary. Nobody's running with the scissors. Nobody took off with the money. There's nothing wrong here, right? This is exactly what happens. So if you just think about it this way, there's almost every really good organization actually started out of a need. That's an important point for later, a need. There was a need that said, we need that. You know, we're all carrying around computers that are bigger than what put people on the moon because Steve Jobs said people hate their cell phones. Like everybody hates their cell phone. Now somebody said my cell phone is just a button on a thing that I don't ever use, right? Like we rarely use it as a phone. We use it for almost everything else. But that starts with a need. It starts with a need. When you have a need and you get excited about this, you start investing time and energy in that need, trying to figure out how to solve that need. And so in one sense, the organization goes down. What I mean by that is resources go down, energy goes down. You're not having any return yet until you hit on the idea that meets the need. When the idea is finally hit, people go, yes, that's it. Now it starts to grow. And then you have processes. And when the idea turns into processes, more people can get involved. And when the processes do well, they become programs. We just routinize them. And now we're humming. And then we get to the top. And if nobody does anything wrong, it will begin to decline. The programs turn into traditions. And the traditions turn into bureaucracy. And then bureaucracy turns into death. So let me give you an example that we all know as Presbyterians. I don't know if you have this in your church, but almost every church I know has this. There was this moment when a couple of men got together and said, you know, the women have all these really great events. We need something for the men. And somebody goes, I know, let's do a men's breakfast. That's a great idea. And somebody goes, you know, Mike has got great bacon. Everybody likes Mike's bacon. Hal's a crack up. He can MC. He's got great jokes. He can run the thing. And Rob, he knows everybody. He can get us speakers. We should have a men's breakfast. And next thing you know, that need, the men need someplace to be together, comes out to an idea, which is a men's breakfast. And then those three guys get organized and they have a men's breakfast. And everybody's thrilled about the men's breakfast. Everybody comes out and says the bacon is great, the jokes were incredible, and we got a Heisman Trophy winner for crying out loud. We should do that. This is amazing. And it starts to take off. And pretty soon people are saying stuff like, we should have this breakfast all the time. And it becomes the first Saturday of the month, we're going to have a men's breakfast. Now we got a program. And it just keeps going. And if nobody does anything wrong, the men's breakfast will decline. And here's how you know it declines. When it was in the process and program stage, you heard announcements from the pulpit like this. Hey, if you know men who need to connect to other men, invite them to the men's breakfast. We got a great place. Mike's bacon is amazing. Hal's funny. Rob's bringing us a cool speaker. It's going to be great. You can meet other men. Just invite them. When it gets to the tradition phase, the announcement from the pulpit is, hey, we need the men to come out to support the men's breakfast. Hear the difference? Right? Like we're having a men's breakfast. Men, Hal's been out there doing it. He's a good guy. He's working really hard. Mike's still out there making the bacon. His bacon's good. You don't want to miss Mike. Come out and support Mike. And you know, Rob, he's got if you've got any ideas for other speakers, give them to Rob. Because he only knows so many Heisman Trophy winners, right? And pretty soon what you realize is that becomes a tradition. And then you're sitting on session one day and somebody comes through with a motion from the men's breakfast committee asking that there will be no other events on the first Saturday of the month, so as not to compete with the men's breakfast. Bureaucracy. And then death. Look, nobody's done anything wrong. Right? Bacon didn't poison anybody. House jokes are getting tired, but they were not offensive. Rob worked really, really hard, and he's been humble. He's been willing to have any other speaker. But it's just natural. It's normal. That's what it is. And every organization, every church, every place you've ever been, this is it. Okay, so today you're leaders. You get to practice being slightly vulnerable with each other. And vulnerable only in this way. You get to actually begin to give your own opinion, and it's got to be safe to do so. So the question I want you to think about is this. Where do you think your church is today? Which quadrant? Are you in 1, 2, 3, or 4? We're going to use this technology that I use. It's really, really helpful. It's called your fingers. In a moment, I'm going to ask you just to put up your fingers about where you think Wayne Presbyterian Church is. Are we in 1? We have a need, a new idea. Are we in 2? We're growing with processes and programs. Are we in 3? We're in traditions. Are we in 4? We're in bureaucracy and death. Sometimes Presbyterians ask me if there can be a 5. But so far we're going to leave it here in these 4. Okay, ready? You just in your brain, you probably already have an answer. So we're all going to vote all at the same time. Watch how great this works. 1, 2, 3, fingers up. What do you think we are? 4, 4, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 3, 1. 3, 3, good, 2, 3.5. It's like there's always somebody going to say 2.5. I think so. Okay. Here's the thing to know. What matters is we don't have to have a debate about where we are at the moment. Notice we all have different opinions. Here's the reason why Charles Handy did this. This is the reason why he did this. Is that if you find yourself in this curve, there are 2 things you cannot do. The first thing you cannot do is nothing. Right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We're doing fine. Why are we doing that? We got a new pastor. Let him figure it out. Like, this is not like, come on, we're going to do nothing, right? Like, come on. What do you think we brought him for, right? Like, you can't do nothing. Because even if everything's going great, you do nothing, it's going to decline. And here's the kicker. The second thing you cannot do is try to go back up the curve. If you find yourself at 2 and think, well, what we really need to do is just say, we need to think like this at the beginning and go back to 1 and get creative. Or if we're at 3, we got to get back to the glory days at the top. Or we're at 4, we got to work really, really hard to get our traditions back. If you go up against the curve, you will decline faster because you're going against all the momentum of the life cycle. So the only thing you can do is start a new curve. Right? Just start a new curve. Except it's hard to start a new curve. And this is the place we're going to talk about. That's why probably some of you said we're at 1 and 2. You're probably thinking, hey, we probably already started a new curve, right? And that's exactly right. You start a new curve. You start with a new idea that comes out of a need. It's usually out of a need. We identified a need. We're going to talk about the kinds of needs that actually spark ideas and the kind of needs that actually turn us back on ourselves. So when you have a need to a new idea, you can start a new curve. But here's the biggest thing that Charles Handy took out of this. This is what he wanted people to know. He said the most important thing for most leaders to know is, yes, this is the cycle, and that's how change happens. But the most important thing to recognize about this is the time to start a new curve is yesterday. It's when you're back here on the way up. Which is when almost none of us want to do it, right? Exactly, right? So the second best time to start a new curve is right now. Because wherever we are, what's the first thing that happens when you start a new curve? It goes down. So you're sitting here with me, we're all excited. By the end of the day, you're going to be like, kumbaya, this is awesome, let's take the hill, we're doing great. And you go announce changes you want to make to the church, and they go, what are you doing? Why are we changing all this stuff? What? Wait a minute. What? The men's bacon just needed, the men's breakfast just needed something besides bacon, right? We just needed, if we just added some granola and oatmeal, that would help. Not everybody likes bacon. We just need to freshen it up. But there's a whole group of men saying stuff like, I appreciate the Saturday men's breakfast, but I travel for work, and I'm going to be home on Saturday, and there's going to be a breakfast. It's going to be me making breakfast for my kids. And I'm coaching sports, and I know it's only one Saturday a month, but man, I got only so many Saturdays with my kids. I'm so sorry I'm not coming. And next thing you know, they're doing little things that are not nearly as cool as when the room was filled with men's breakfast. But it begins to be experiments that can help us start a new curve. And that's why the time of great confusion. And because it's confusing, that's why people are disappointed. We thought you had the silver bullet. We thought you had it figured out. We thought you were going to launch the new plan, the new program. We got t-shirts for it. We got oh my gosh, right? Why does it feel like we don't know what we're doing? And the answer is because we actually don't know what we're doing. That's actually part of it. We actually don't know how this works. So here's the thing I'd like you to think about right off. I'm not going to ask you to talk to each other yet. My wife is she's an artist, but she was before that she was a marriage and family therapist, so she's on the more introverted side. And she likes to say that in rooms like this, all the extroverts shine and the introverts hide, and everybody likes it that way. But one of the things she's also taught me is that we can't make everything processing all the time. Some of us need to have our thoughts. So we're going to start by the thoughts. What I'd love you to do is either jot down notes or however you best think. Just answer these two questions for yourself. We won't even bring them out yet. We'll come back to them later. What are some of the challenges the church would need to face to start a new curve? We've been here this long. We've tried this thing before. What are the kind of challenges do you think we'd have to face to try to start a new curve? Just think about that for yourself. And then what do you think it would require for you as a leader to lead a new curve? And I'm just going to give you like a minute or so to jot some notes, think about that, try to make it as tangible as possible just for yourself. And we'll talk about what's behind that. So go right ahead. So here's one of the reasons why we start with this. I'll just so you understand what we're doing. Adults learn better from the concrete to the abstract, rather than the abstract to the concrete. The more concrete it is, the faster we learn stuff. It's one of the reasons why some topics are really hard for us. Like if someone tries to tell you, well, you really need to understand Reformed theology, it's pretty hard to master that one. But if someone says to you, this is the way we make decisions in the session meeting, and you go, yeah, that's what I'm used to doing, they go, well, that's based on our understanding of Reformed theology, you'll get it faster. It's a little bit like if you're trying to teach someone to cook. I can give you a long, beautiful lecture on the Maillard effect, or I can just brown some chicken, and you'll discover brown chicken tastes better than not brown chicken, right? Like, it's just easier to be concrete. So throughout the day, I'm going to ask you to try to be as concrete as possible. And because you see the church in different places, you'll probably have some different pieces, and that'll be helpful. I'm not going to have you actually share it yet. I want you to hold that for a second and just be thinking about it as we go through this. Because one of the hardest parts about trying to lead in a way that brings transformation is the way in which we have been trained impacts the way in which we see problems. The way in which we've been trained impacts the way we see problems. So as one of my mentors taught me something that one of his mentors taught him, that he learned on a Marine base, at the moment of crisis, you will not rise to the occasion, you default to your training. And what that means is our training, even that training that was not conscious, right? Just not conscious. Just because it was just what we did all the time, right? Just this is what we do. That impacts you. At the moment of crisis, you do not rise to the occasion, you default to your training. So for about the past 5 years of my life, I have had this new thing that has entered into my life called a son-in-law. And my son-in-law is a wonderful man. I love my son-in-law. He comes from Ohio, which means he's got this deep aversion to anything Michigan. He just does not like that. But he's this amazing kind of Midwestern guy, Midwestern roots, who loves. I mean, you want your daughter to marry a Browns fan. They are patient and long-suffering and forgiving. They're used to disappointment. It's amazing. It's amazing. And what's powerful about my son-in-law is having someone who I love enter my house and just be himself in my house. It's changed the way I think about my family, right? So my daughter and my son-in-law come over for dinner, and we're having a family dinner, and we're doing our usual thing. And when the last fork hits the plate, my son-in-law jumps up and clears the dishes. He just jumps up, clears the dishes. He did like once. I looked at him and like, oh, he's showing off. He did it like 2-3 times. Not even talking about it, thinking about it. I looked at my wife and said, we failed as parents. Our kids never jump up and clear the dishes. And I said it out loud to my daughter, and she said, Dad, ask him why he clears the dishes. And I went, I don't care why he clears the dishes. I just know the dishes are cleared. No, you should understand. I said, okay, Ben, why do you clear the dishes? And he goes, I don't know. We should always clear the dishes. And then Allie goes, and why'd you clear the dishes? Like she can see something he can't. It's second nature. He goes, oh. Well, my dad always started with clearing the dishes, so I kind of followed my dad. And why did your dad clear the dishes? Oh, because as soon as we got all the dishes cleared, then we could play games. In my family, we played games after every dinner. That's just what we did. In my family, where my wife is a therapist, we don't clear the dishes. We sit over dirty dishes and we talk about our feelings until we cry. That's what we do. Like, that's a good night at our house, right? Usually it takes an extra bottle of wine and pretty soon everybody's crying, and it's awesome. It's like, that's what we do. And so, Allie says, maybe we could have a little bit more fun. like maybe, so what was natural, second nature to him, he was trained in, we actually had to take on consciously to retrain to be a bit more fun. Now, the interesting part is that Ben now loves sitting around a table talking about his feelings. Midwestern family, they never did that. He's like, this is amazing. You guys can have a conversation like this, right? And so it's become what was defaulted to, you do naturally. When you want to change it, you have to be intentional. And that's one of the things that adults need to understand when you're trying to change a system, change a church, trying to start a new curve. You can't just do what you've always done. You actually have to disrupt it intentionally to do so. So let me give you one more example, and then we'll turn this into a conversation. If you've been reading my little book, How Not to Waste a Crisis, this will be somewhat familiar to you. But if you haven't gotten there, it's really okay. There's no homework assigned, but it's here for you. Let me just help you understand a little bit about this. Heifetz and Linsky, they're the folks who gave us the quote, leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. It's they're from Harvard. Interesting little factoid. I moved to New York City to the Upper West Side for just this 1 year. Marty Linsky lives around the corner from me. So I ended up getting to know him a little bit. We had a couple of meals together. I'm trying hard not to stalk him. But he's like, what's this religious dude? Keeps following me. But it's fascinating. They basically did an article in 2009 called Leadership in a Permanent Crisis. And their premise was this. It's 2009. And we've already had two major crises this decade. We had 9/11 and we had the 2008 economic crisis. Could you imagine if you have to lead in a world where there's two major crises every decade? They had no idea 2020 was coming, did they? Like, we all know this because we've kind of suffered through it, but we probably didn't even understand what it was. In the pandemic, we literally were thrust into a health crisis that led to an economic crisis that has led to a deep political crisis that we're still feeling the reverberations of today. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, you will all be able to agree this is actually not the tone or feel that we all wanted it to be, right? And so much of it comes out of the fact that there's these reverberating crises that happened all at one time. It's like we were in 1918, 1929, and 1968 all at the same time. And if you want to add that to, say, Russia invading Ukraine, you got 1939. Or say, Israel and Gaza, you got 1967, 1973. Like, these are complicated times. I always tell people, I don't think this is the hardest time to ever be in church leadership. I think it would have been harder to do so during the Black Plague when 25% of the human race died. And I'm sure it was more difficult with one of my clients than it was in Wayne, Pennsylvania. He asked me to pray for him that they could get through the entire Christmas Eve service without a drone strike. He's a pastor in Kyiv. So that would have been harder, right? But this is more complicated. In crises like this, you know what to do. You survive. These are more complicated because we've never been through something like this. And anybody who tells you they've got 3 steps to the perfect church and 5 ways to heal the world, and I alone can do it, they are lying to you. Because nobody's ever been here before. It takes a different kind of leadership. Left alone, we'll default toward training. We need a different kind of leadership. And what Heifetz Zielinski said is in every crisis, and you can read about it, so I won't belabor it, but in every crisis there's 2 phases. There's an acute phase where everybody's rallying together to stabilize, to protect, to buy time. You know, so if you've ever gone to emergency room, right? If you're rushed into an emergency room, my father's 82 years old. During COVID, he needed a heart valve transplant. My dad is a stubborn old Alaskan. At 82 years old, if he had been doing what he normally does, default to his training, it would have been working. And because he had the shelter in place, my stepmom could see that he wasn't breathing and got him to an emergency room, saved his life. We all know that during times of crisis, people come together, right? In Altadena, it was amazing. All these stories about Los Angeles people who don't care for each other, coming out in droves, caring for neighbors, like just did. Neighbors. People do. Hurricanes. Doesn't matter. Same thing, right? Tornadoes. Storms, ice storms. People come together. COVID. I mean, every church I know. March 13th, Friday the 13th, 2020, the world shut down. That Sunday, March 15th, every church I know had a television ministry that day. It was called Facebook Live. And instead of saying, "The Lord be with you," people said, "Is this on?" Somebody's nephew held up an iPhone, and you broadcasted, and you did church. And everybody went, "We did it. We got together, we did it." And then I would call people. I spent the entire morning with all my clients online going, "How did you do? How'd it go?" And they're like, "It's great. As long as we don't have to cancel Easter." None of us realize what we're about to enter into, right? The acute phase, stabilize, protect, buy time. It's like if you're in the middle of a blizzard, you're not doing a blizzard. You go to Costco, you get all the toilet paper, all the water you can, you hunker down, right? What Heifetz Zielinski said is good leaders understand there's a second phase. And we were talking earlier with someone about how these do overlap, but there's a second phase. And the second phase is as soon as you calm down enough to know you're going to survive, you can now ask some deeper questions. So if you're sitting at the emergency room and everybody knows, you've seen that all the medical staff and everybody kind of calmed down, and next thing you know, they're asking you questions, and people are checking their iPhones, people are having a conversation. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I had to take Dad. And you're thinking, how do I get back my pants? How do I get out of here? How do I get back to normal? Just remember this. Everybody in a time of disruption wants to go back to the familiar. Family and familiar are the same root word. So when you go through a disruption, or you take people through a change, and it feels unfamiliar, they don't just feel disoriented, they feel unfamilied. They feel abandoned. They're like little kids who've been looking forward to going to Disney World all year. It's not the happiest place on earth if you lose mom and dad on Main Street. You first want to run home to mama. Then you'll go to Adventureland. And what happens with so many of us is we realize that acute phase, once we get through it, we got back to normal. I want to ask churches, back to what normal? Back to the denomination that has lost half our membership in my lifetime? Back to churches that have lost young people under 40 at a rate of 100,000 a month for 20 years? Back to what? What good leaders understand is that the adaptive phase gives you the opportunity to address the underlying issues that we've not had the will to confront before the crisis. They were there all along. I can tell you, my dad, COVID did not cause my dad's bad heart. My dad's been working on that bad heart for 40 years. He hasn't been to a doctor in 40 years. His eating and lack of exercise and all the things that everybody told you finally caught up, COVID saved his life. Because COVID revealed that in a time when we could do something about it. So what we have actually with a crisis is the opportunity to address the underlying issues. The things that will give us the opportunity in moments like this to hit the organizational reset button. Very often, they're the things that we have to face if we're going to climb a new curve. So here's what I want you to do. This will be the first conversation we'll have around the table. It'll take a few minutes to let you talk about this. And I'm not going to give you a lot of time. And if some of you are in smaller groups, you might want to, however you want to, you can whatever you want to do, you can do. You're grown-ups. But I want you to at least have this conversation. I want you to ask the question, what underlying conditions did you see in your church during crisis? You can go back to COVID, maybe you had a different crisis. Maybe it was, but whenever you think about crises you go through, what were the underlying issues? What were the things that were there? Now, some of you, and this is okay, and you should save this and do this for later. Some of you go, we found a lot of really good things. There's a lot of great capacity. I mean, I found out that my stepmom is on it with my dad. I don't have to worry too much. She's going to make sure he's okay. That's a good thing. But for all the good things, what are the underlying things that we haven't had the will to confront that now we see? They were there all along, and now we're clear about them. They might be hard or difficult or confusing, but they're there. And now we know. They've been revealed. In a theological language, we talk about this as being like apocalyptic, like the book of Revelation. It reveals what is there. It's below the surface, beyond the sea. I'm going to give you like 7 or 8 minutes just to talk about that around the table. And just together name them with each other. And just kind of put them on the table and talk about it. Okay? And then we'll come back and we'll jump back in again. Okay, go ahead and go. Actually, Susan and I are going to get started. We're going to just sit right here and have this conversation at this. Yeah, you guys are ready here. Way to go. Yeah. I like the way the center tables are going. Yeah, it's all those back row people. Yeah.
People sit in the front, right?
Mm-hmm. So this is where I'd like to start this conversation. It'll be a bit more of a conversation.
We've been conversing already.
I know, it's a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. The entire irony of my life is I try to get people to talk to each other, and then I got to tell them to shut up so I can talk. So, yeah. So, this is what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to think about the conversation at your table, and if there was anything that was shared, like a lot of us said the same thing, or more than one of us said the same thing, like, oh, this was an underlying issue that we saw, or if there was something when somebody saw spark some energy, like, oh my gosh, you're right, or I saw that, or I think that was nuts. I didn't think that at all. Like whatever. So either it was shared or it sparked energy. I'd like to gather up a few of them, if that's okay. So we don't need to necessarily have everybody share, but I'd like to get a few of them out and about. So who had something that was said at our table? A number of us thought this. You guys, what did you guys have there back? What'd you have? Lacking confidence about the vision of leadership. In other words, and division of leadership. Yeah. Can you tell me a smidge more about that? Since you guys shared that together? No, I can't tell you about it, Todd.
It was a difficult time in the church, and the leadership wasn't doing what it needed to do.
Yeah.
And there were changes in the leadership, and the new changes really weren't doing.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of a crisis. We realized we didn't have as much leadership capacity as we thought we had, and that. Yep. What else would you say?
Well, I think another thing that we saw amongst that division was maybe an underlying condition was a lack of kindness with each other.
So the way we are community was not exactly helpful at this moment, yep. Right? And the sense of division, yeah. Excellent. Good. Others of you, what else did you share on your tables?
Well, just
We've been too dependent on pastoral leadership. Yeah. Good. Yeah. The sense of shared leadership capacity is a really important. We're going to talk more about that today, about how these things are so complicated they have to be bigger than one person, right? Yeah. So that becomes an important thing. Good. What else was revealed during the time? Please, back here.
We were sort of the same thing. It was basically lack of leadership during COVID. And it was a time where you could have brought people together, but we sort of didn't have a local leadership during COVID.
Yeah. Boom. Yeah. Notice the crisis then reveals something, right? That now that we're away from the crisis, we can actually sit back and look at it and go, okay, what can we do about that? This is a deeper issue. This is a bigger thing. Yeah, it's right. Good. What sparked energy at your conversation? Either shared or what?
Same thing. I thought that
Leadership.
Too pastor-centric.
Too pastor.
But I don't know how much you know about the church, but we had a senior pastor here who was here for 12 years.
Yeah.
And his dad had been pastor at the church also. And so the default was to defer to him.
Yeah.
You know, he was literally the voice of God.
So defaulting to the
And so
yeah.
maybe there wasn't enough dependence
Yeah.
on session as a group
Yeah.
versus depending individually on the pastors.
Boom. Okay. Good. Susan, say.
Yeah, I think we realized that, particularly during COVID, that there was a lack of connection with our membership.
Deep connection with our membership.
Yes.
Yeah.
We didn't realize who was not coming.
Yeah.
And we just didn't have, and who needed help and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Beautiful. Other thing, go ahead.
Dovetailing on that, we talked about the fact that we discovered we were not as healthy as we were putting ourselves
Out there to be. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah.
Among our
Or like relationally healthy.
connections to the church.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, another one that we came up with, which was interesting, was an underlying condition that was revealed was a reluctance or lack of motivation to get to worship. Here,
Yep.
right? So perhaps that was, thinking back to the chart, something of a tradition,
Right.
perhaps, and then very easy to get out of the habit.
Yep.
And so.
Yep. There were significant amounts of conversations around the fact that once we were out of a habit of something and we disrupted the habit, we realized, oh, wait a minute, what was this a value to us or not? Yeah. Please go ahead, Susan. I'll come back to you.
Well, we've known for many years that there's a lot of competing
Yeah.
events on Sundays.
Yep.
But we didn't recognize we just kind of accepted it.
Yep.
We didn't recognize that maybe there are other creative ways that we can bring people in.
Yep. So a lack of creativity about bringing people in or evangelism or outreach. Awesome. What are you going to say?
Well, when we were talking about the pastor-centric part,
Uh-huh.
we also touched on that right before the pandemic, we had a long-standing leadership team. It was actually a married couple that led the youth college programs.
Right.
And one stepped away to
Yeah.
lead a church. The other stuck around during the pandemic,
Uh-huh.
and they both left.
Yeah.
And it was like the bottom.
The bottom fell out. Yeah.
And somebody else was brought in, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there was so much on
Yep.
that
Yep.
couple
Yep.
in terms of
So much on that
success of the
couple.
program.
Yep.
And so,
Yep. So I love the way what is your name?
Shannon,
Sharon, thank you for that. What I love about this example, these are all good examples, but what's so interesting about that is I'll bet you at the moment you were saying, oh, we got hit because we lost that couple. We just need another couple like that. Like we didn't realize there actually was this underlying thing, which was our way of connecting to each other cannot survive one couple doing what couples do, especially when they're younger, right? Like okay, this is kind of normal. We can survive that because we didn't have these other pieces. What I want you to keep thinking about is this notion of the underlying issues, because this is where the deepest transformation is. And these are difficult. And the most important thing to remember about these is that these are really complex. So I told you on Friday the 13th, 2020, I was actually doing a presentation about some of this material with a group of church planters in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. 50 church planners came together. We were talking about this stuff. I got on the plane in Sioux Falls. I went through the Denver airport, which I'm always going through Denver. I fly United, so it's like Newark or Denver or Chicago or Houston. I'm going through the Denver airport. I get on my plane to go to Los Angeles, and the flight attendant hands me a Clorox wipe. And not the nice little branded envelopes they had today. Like someone went to Costco and got the big bag of wipes. And they're saying, in order to keep us safe from this coronavirus, could you help us wipe down the plane? And I remember thinking, you're United Airlines, you keep people safe at 30,000 feet. If you need the help of a pastor, we're in big trouble, right? But I realized everything changed. By the time I landed and I turned my phone back on, my phone blew up. We went remote. I have not been back to an office at Fuller Seminary since. Like I ended up giving up my office. Like everything changed. At the time I had 65 staff all over the country, and I had to send them all home and take care of them and all that stuff. And you guys all went through it too. What we started realizing was that disruption now began to reveal all these things. And one of the things that happened to me was I travel about 100,000 miles a year, and I couldn't travel for 18 months. So I ended up doing this thing called, have you heard of Zoom? Yeah, I know. Right. I ended up doing Zoom webinars, and I did 170 of them. And what I did was that question I just asked you, I let people put it into chat, which means I have a lot of data. And as a researcher, this was gold, right? And so we started getting stuff like this. Underlying conditions. Now, yours will be different. Everybody's different. But these were like the big themes that came up over and over and over again. The first one was people said, really, we were not as Christian as we thought we were. Like we had a lack of deep, pervasive discipleship. I literally had a mega church pastor from the South, 8,000 members in multiple sites, get on a consultation with me and say, I'm going to do my sabbatical, I'm praying, but really what I'm basically thinking about is it's time for me to retire. After 34 years, I think I have wasted my life. And I went, why? He said, during COVID, my people were vile to each other on social media. They were vile to each other. That was his phrase, vile to each other. We were not nearly as Christian as we thought we were. In almost every crisis up to this point, we don't have the data yet, but once the sociologists get it all done, they're probably going to tell us that this could be the first major global crisis that the church didn't grow in. Churches grow in crisis. The first 300 years of the church, every time Rome had a pandemic, they used to call them plagues back then, every time they had a pandemic, the church grew. They kicked the missionaries out of China. The church grew in China. Not this one. One of the dudes who studies this stuff said, I was at a gathering with him, and Tom Rainer said, we have been studying the decline of Christianity in the West, and where we thought the church would be in 2027, it hit in 2022. COVID took 5 years away from us. We just accelerated it. The lack of community. Some of you talked about this. The lack of deep connection to each other. You know, we Presbyterians, we're big on this. We are members of the body of Christ. We belong to one another. Every time you baptize a baby, people don't know this, but when you say, do you commit to help this parent raise these child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? You're basically saying, yeah, I'm in for the next 18 years, right? Like we're actually deeply connected. Community is really important to us, right? Really, really important. And we saw all kinds of people who just wandered away or left or got mad or decided that they weren't going to be here because you had the audacity to ask them to wear a mask, right? One small piece of fabric and the church was falling apart in scandals, The lack of cross-generational engagement was just a nice scientific way of saying we lost a bunch of young people. And the disconnection between the older folks and the younger folks is significant. And which was really significant is where that data is leading us now. Like a friend of mine was working on what's called the third project. It's all about the third of life, from 60 to 90. The statistics are pretty overwhelming that if you have a sense of a reasonable physical health and a good sense of friendship and community and a purpose that is bigger than you, 60s and 70s are the most fulfilling years of your life. And yet most of us spend all of our time living in such a way that that the younger generation gets disconnected from us. Here's another little factoid I love to tell people. Do you know between now and 2050, of age 60 and over, that demographic is going to grow by 47%. And under 18 is going to grow by 3%. Oh, we're so old. Maybe Presbyterians are perfectly positioned to reach a generation of people who are the least churched older generation ever. People get more religious as they get older. The baby boomers are the least so. Interesting. Lack of cross-generational engagement. The lack of extensive leadership capacity. You talked about that, right? Like, this is one of the parts that was interesting. In California, at least, they did not forbid you from gathering. The government forbid us from gathering in groups that were too big. So they said, if you can gather in like groups of 12 safely, you can gather all you want. And people are saying stuff like, what can you possibly do for Jesus with only 12 people? Right? Right? The problem wasn't the 12 people. The problem is we didn't have enough leaders to hold the church together if we had a distributed church. We didn't have enough leaders to lead groups of 12 people. Like, you know that 80-20 principle, 20% of the people do 80% of the work? You're like, yes, you're looking at the 20, right? Most churches, they would take that deal. If you can get 20% of your people to do 80% of the week, that's really good. Because in most churches in America, it's like 199 and not the way Jesus talked about it, right? It's like me and Mildred is 82 and she's tired of doing youth ministry. Right? It's like, could you please get somebody else to volunteer for something, right? Right? Extensive leadership capacity. And this one showed up a lot. The lack of prophetic wisdom for addressing challenges of social justice. We all experienced this social upheaval that we continue to have in our midst. And what's interesting is the church is no better at that conversation than anybody else. And sometimes we're even worse. I just have this little fantasy in my head. Could you imagine a day? Imagine a day. We have another terrible crisis, like another thing that hits the front page of, you know, the New York Times, or hits the front of CNN. This could explode in violence. And all of a sudden the media and the government come together and say, we have to admit that what we've been doing doesn't work. So we have called in people whose traditions have been talking about justice for 5,000 years. We would like to learn how to bring justice through Christians. Can you even imagine that? Because we're not good at it. We saw it every time, right? I'm working with churches in Minneapolis who are saying that, like, George Floyd tore us apart, and not because we wanted it to, because it did, right? These are, okay, the thing to realize about these is, these and the things you've talked about, these are complicated. These are not going to be solved by having like a contemporary service with a kicking band and a smoke machine, right? You're not going to be able to like get this solved by changing your name from Wayne Presbyterian to the Flood, and, you know, getting Ryan to get a tattoo. Like that isn't going to happen. Like, it isn't going to change anything. These are really deep challenges. They're different. They're underlying issues. They require a different kind of leadership. And that's basically what I want you to think about today. There's a guy named Ed Friedman. Anybody know Ed Friedman's work? Yeah, Ryan, you would know, because you've probably got in seminary too, right? Yeah. Ed Friedman only shows up in seminaries. He was a Jewish rabbi who basically studied what's called Boehnian family systems theory. He applied psychology to congregations and religious organizations. He was Jewish, but he went around and worked with a lot of mainline religious folks. This is my favorite quote of his. When any relationship system is imaginatively gridlocked, just pause there for a second. Any relationship system. What he wanted people to get is, when you're in a church or you're in a faith-based organization, he basically would say you're in almost any system. It is first and foremost a relationship system. We experience a room, and we experience the way we experience it in terms of relationships. So what he's basically saying is that what God says about us biblically and theologically is true about us psychologically. We are first and foremost a relationship system, which is why if someone leaves this church hurt, they don't give you a 2-star review on Yelp and move on. They feel betrayed. When any relationship system is imaginatively gridlocked, I love that phrase, imaginatively gridlocked. It could be one of my favorites. Like, think about them every time you gather in a gathering like this and people are like, we're going to think outside the box, we're going to try to solve the problem, we're going to have like Post-it notes and pipe cleaners, and we're going to like have lots of sugar, and we're going to spend all day dreaming, and when the time you're done at the end of the day, you have this really great definition of box. And then we've argued over what really is a box. And the next thing you know, there's a motion to the session of defining box this way, right? If you haven't been in a meeting that was imaginatively gridlocked, let me invite you to a faculty meeting. Oh my gosh. Because we know this, that the more status you get, and the more degrees you get, and the older you get, the more sure you get about the way the world has been. And so next thing you know is you have an entire group of scholars who all agree to write a journal article, each on their own definition of box, and we're going to publish it together and call it The Wonderful World of Boxes. When any relationship system is imaginatively gridlocked, it cannot get free simply through more thinking about the problem. Conceptually stuck systems cannot be unstuck simply by trying harder. So if anything you've heard me say this morning sounds like I'm saying, suck it up, buttercup, what'd you sign up for? You're missing my point. It's not about trying harder. At the moment of crisis, you default to your training. That's like being a canoeer in a river with no water. To keep paddling is just going to exhaust you, and you're not going to get anywhere. For a fundamental reorientation to occur, that spirit of adventure, and this is where everything starts getting a little less depressing this morning. That spirit of adventure, which optimizes serendipity. We're going to talk about what that means. Optimizes serendipity. And which enables new perceptions beyond the control of our thinking processes. We're going to talk about how that feels. Must happen first. What is a spirit of adventure? Spirit of adventure means it requires learning. It's going to result in loss. And it's going to reveal resilience. To go through a spirit of adventure literally means that we don't know what's coming, that we're in a different environment, and that the world has changed around us, and we have to engage in an adventure. So if you're at all familiar with my book, Canoeing the Mountains, I built the entire metaphor around the story of Lewis and Clark, who were sent by Congress to find a water route that would connect the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. If you think about this, 1805, what everybody knew about the world was there was the Pacific Ocean, and all the important people of the world were on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean are the Europeans. The Europeans are the important people. On the other side of the Pacific Ocean, there are all these resources these important people in Europe want, like coffee and sugar and sometimes human beings. And if you can figure out a way to get the things from the East to the people in the West, to Europe, well, the easiest way to move raw material is over water. That's why there's the Erie Canal, right? You move it over water. So when Columbus stumbles onto this continent, we can't say discovered, people have been here 10,000 years, and he dies without even knowing what he found. For 100 years, people were depressed, because they had a giant landmass in the middle of their water route. By 1805, 300 years later, the project, every government of European descent is about claiming the water route. And what they knew is there was the Atlantic Ocean, there was the Gulf of Mexico, that was still called the Gulf of Mexico. There was the Mississippi River, the Missouri River. On the other side was the Pacific Ocean. Boats had come up the Pacific Ocean, but they'd never found the connection. They were trying to find what they called the Northwest Passage, this water route that would take it all the way through. And on August 12th, 1805, Meriwether Lewis takes a drink out of a tiny spring on the edge of Montana and Idaho. This spring, I've been there. You can go there. You can actually go visit it. This spring, this water in Montana flows all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. It's the source of the Missouri River. And for 18 months, they had traveled upstream. They'd paddled upstream from St. Charles, Missouri, up the Mississippi, up the Missouri, all the way across. They'd spent the winter with the Mandan tribe in North Dakota. They kept going again across the Great Falls of Montana, kept going until they got to this spring. And what they believed is that they would take their canoes out of this spring, they would take it over a little pass, and there would be a spring on the other side. And now they would get to go downstream. They would go downstream. Woohoo! Here we go, as fast as possible, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. They would take a selfie, send it back to Thomas Jefferson. They would be declared the greatest explorers of all time because they would have discovered the Northwest Passage. And you know, because you had 11th grade history class, that when they went over that Lemhi Pass, they actually found the Rocky Mountains. Now, here's what's powerful about this, and I want to be careful. I know where I am geographically, but they were asked, do you know you'll have to go over mountains? The Mandan said, there's water on the other side, but you're going to have to go over mountains. And they said, mountains, schmountains. We're from Virginia. We're great at mountains. They were thinking their mountains were like those, Appalachian mountains, right? The Smoky Mountains. They're beautiful, by the way. They're gorgeous, but I'm from California. We would have turned that national park into condos a long time ago. Like those barely qualify as mountains in our idea, right? I actually did this presentation for a group of church-planting Catholic missionaries in Appalachia in Southern Virginia. When I finished telling this story, they opened the window and they said, look behind us, that's the Appalachian Trail. And it looks just like these green hills. When they heard mountains, they heard green hills. They had no mental model for those mountains in the back. So when they get to the top of the Lemhi Pass, Meriwether Lewis realizes 300 years of maps are wrong. One of the men wrote in his journals, those were the most horrible mountains we ever beheld. I think he was convinced he'd have to carry the canoes over them. They were water guys. They'd come on a canoe trip. They were trying to find a water route. The government had given them money and training and stuff to find a water route. There's no water route. The world in front of them is totally different than the world behind them. And this is where absolutely every single church is today. We're standing here on the Lemhi Pass. COVID or any other crisis threw the future in front of us. Every part of us wants to think that was just a blip. And now what we realize is it's not a blip. This is this disruptive world we're in. And now we have to decide what we're going to do. What do you do at this moment? One of my friends is a pastor in Denver, Colorado. He said Denver, Colorado was founded by the people who made their way across all of the dangers of the Great Plains. And they woke up one morning and went, right here, we're stopping right here, right? Great view, put up an Airbnb, maybe encourage some young people to go ahead and go, but we are stopping right here. And most of our churches are thinking, if we can just be the Airbnb on the edge of the future, that's good. Some churches are actually even more so. You know, actually, I think what we've learned is it's not about the future. It's about canoeing. We need to be the people who preserve canoeing. We got to make sure that everybody keeps canoeing. We're going to go back to comfortable ground, take people on canoe trips, sing songs about canoeing, make sure there's enough legislation to protect canoeing, make sure that no matter what happens, we keep canoeing great. We'll make it great again if we need to. But we do anything we can to preserve the past. I was pastor for 27 years in Los Angeles. I was ordained at Hollywood Presbyterian Church. In 1980s, when I was there, it had 4,000 members. In 1963, it was the largest Presbyterian church in the country. And how do I know this? Because it was featured in the LA Times. And I have a copy of the LA Times from 1963. Somebody saved it because the front page was about the Kennedy assassination and the Warren Commission. The back page of the front section was about the 8,000 member Hollywood Presbyterian Church. But the reason I kept it is because in 1963, the Los Angeles Times, right there in the newspaper, put a box with a week's worth of daily Bible readings. If you can remember a day when the LA Times or the New York Times or the Philadelphia Inquirer would help you with your morning quiet time, you know the world in front of you is really different than the world behind you. We live in a totally different world. It's been one generation, my lifetime. Today, Hollywood Press has about 400 members and was working really hard to figure out what does it mean to be an urban church in this changing world. And this is what every tall steeple church, every church is having to grapple. What do we do? And few churches get to that moment, they look in the future and they say what Meriwether Lewis said, which is, we proceeded on. They didn't know what was happening. They were lost. One of the men wrote in his journals, I wonder if when we get to the West, we'll find the dinosaurs. They had no idea what was in front of them, did they? That's when we start a spirit of adventure. How do you canoe over mountains? You don't. You literally have to decide, are we canoers or are we discoverers? And one of the most powerful parts of the story is that Meriwether Lewis, just without even hesitating, said we proceeded on. And what's so interesting about it is, think about this. The entire economic policy of the United States was built on finding that water route. We're going to find that water route. We can tax everybody else. We can get ourselves wealthy quickly. It's 1805. War of 1812 is coming. We got to, Great Britain is just still breathing down our neck. We got to get as strong as we possibly can. And he decides to keep going. Not to go back and tell Jefferson, by the way, your plan is not going to work. Because he actually had a deeper value. How do you canoe over mountains? You keep going because you have a mission that's bigger than the one in front of you. So what it requires then, and then we'll just do this piece for a bit and then we'll take a little bit of a break. What it requires then is a different way of leading. You can't just be the expert that navigates and does what you've always done. They were expert water navigators. They were expert canoers. The world changed. The environment changed on them. They couldn't just keep paddling. So what Heifetz and Linsky teach us, we've had them a couple times already, is the first thing you can do, and you can practice this right now. You can do this in every session meeting. Whenever a problem comes before you, the first thing you should ask yourself is, what kind of problem is it? Well, I know it's going to be tempting, because some of you are going to be like, well, I've been thinking about this all night long, and you know what we should do? You're going to be doing this. And here's what I know. Here's the high-priced consultant is going to tell you this. This person is always wrong. You know why? You're smart people. You would have done it already. So that's why it doesn't work. We got to climb a new curve. So the first thing you do is you ask yourself a question, what kind of problem is it? Now, roughly speaking, an easy way to just divide up problems. It's more complex and sometimes they overlap, but you can start this way. Is it a technical problem or is it an adaptive challenge? A technical problem is not a trivial problem. A technical problem is a problem an expert can solve, right? An expert can solve it. So, and my father, he has a heart valve transplant. His heart valve is going out. He goes to the emergency room. He hasn't been to a doctor in 40 years. The emergency room doctor tells him, you got to go get to an expert. He goes to a specialist. He's going to see a doctor. I call up there and I go, Dad, how you doing? You haven't been to a doctor in 40 years. What was it like to go to the doctor today? He goes, oh, it was fine. I said, what? It was? He goes, oh, yeah. The doctor said to me, Mr. Bolsinger, I know you're nervous. I'm not nervous. Oh, yeah, he was nervous. Yeah. But I do 5 of these a week. I do 5 of these a week, he told me. 5 a week. He's the best in the world. If you want to know where the best in the world in everything is, it's in Salem, Oregon. Because my dad is convinced that everything he has is the best in the world. Because he's of a generation that problems are solved by the people who are the best in the world. Technical problems, application of current knowledge, skills, and tools to resolve a situation. Experts, best practices. They're not trivial, they're just, we have the capacity to solve them. So if right here, we're sitting in this room, and right here someone just ran in and said, can anybody help us? A little child was just run over by a car. It looks terrible. There are people in this room who know exactly what to do. Right? I know how to comfort, I know how to be with people in grief. There are certain people, I know how to call an EMT. Like, we know exactly what to do. It can be terrible, but we know what to do. I work at a seminary. Everybody who comes to seminary, somebody said to them, "You're the best Christian I know. You should go pro." And they come off to professional Christian school. And when we're done with them, we give them a Master of Divinity. Does that sound like a superhero or what? Like it's right out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Master of Divinity, right? They're experts at certain things. How to interpret the scriptures, how to understand church history, polity. There's only a few people who even care about that one, right? In a lot of towns, pastors are the psychological paramedics. I will go talk to you because I don't know who else to talk to. Or our marriage is in trouble and we trust you. We get trained in that stuff. We're experts in that stuff. Adaptive challenges cannot be solved with being an expert. It requires people to make a shift, and notice this language, shift in values, attitudes, or behaviors. How easily do people shift values, attitudes, and behaviors? And how do you know what you should shift and shouldn't shift? Because if you do, you lose who you are. In every conversation, we're asking ourselves, what kind of problem are we facing? And if it's a technical problem, we'll find best practices and we'll apply expertise. We need someone to give a sermon on the Trinity Sunday on the Trinity without committing heresy. You know, don't talk about eggs and shamrock and waters and stuff. They're all heresies. We train people how to do it, but you can do it. Or is it an adaptive challenge where there's no expertise? We don't know what to do. We've tried a bunch of stuff. It hasn't worked anymore. What used to work doesn't work anymore. I was just sitting here on a call with a bishop in the Methodist Church, and he literally said, I was trained as a youth minister, and everything I was trained 40 years ago doesn't work today. We still got to do youth ministry, but everything we were trained to do doesn't work today. What do? You become learners who experiment. Adaptive challenges are like a spirit of adventure. They require learning. And so the most important thing you can all begin to do is become a community that is comfortable knowing that your leadership leadership depends upon your learning. And for most of us, this is profoundly difficult. Psychologists tell us the 3 hardest words for a human to say is not I love you or I forgive you or I'm sorry. It is I don't know, right? I don't know. Someone comes up to you, you're on session, so what are we going to do about this? I don't know. My kids aren't coming to the church, and I don't think my grandkids are going to grow up in the church, and we're trying to reach them, and we're doing everything we can, and what should we do? I don't know. We're trying hard to reach our neighbors, and our neighborhood is not the same way as it was before, and people don't even live in this neighborhood, they commute in, and so we're trying to figure out how to be vibrant in the middle of downtown, and what should we do? I don't know. We could try stuff. Try stuff. It's going to require expertise, experimentation, not expertise. So the first thing here is the first little lesson. The first lesson is, and you'll find this in the book, and we'll teach you how to do this, see the shift before you solve the problem. See the shift before you solve the problem. As soon as you say, we are no longer in a technical situation, it's no longer about expertise, instead of solving the problem, do what's called get up on the balcony and see the shift you have to make. Ask yourself the questions, what's the shift of values, attitudes, or behaviors? What's the shift that we need to make to face this problem? What's the shift before we try to solve it? I'll give you an example of one of my clients. So I'm working with a client. It's in a southern city. They are in the side of the city that has become very urbanized, but in a multicultural way. The tech industry has come into that part of the city. It's close to the airport, and they have become a multicultural neighborhood. Multi-ethnic, multicultural neighborhood. I went to their church last week. I stopped by there on way through and went to their worship services. And they have one of those maps. Remember those maps we used to have, like of where all the missionaries we support are in the world? They asked everybody in their congregation to put a pin on the map of where they're from. And it was their people in their church are from all over the world. It's deeply multicultural. And what's interesting today is their deepest value, and we're going to come back to this one, their deepest value has always been, we want to be a church that is missional. We want to be a church that understands the mission doesn't start by sending money over seawater. It starts when we cross the sidewalk. Like, we're going to reach the people in our neighborhood. We're going to be about our neighborhood. So today, they are the most multi-ethnic church I've ever seen. It's stunning to me. They look like their neighborhood. They are 2,000 members, and they are incredibly diverse. They look like their neighborhood, and they are reaching their neighborhood. They only have one problem. The problem is every single time the pastor preaches, including last Sunday, he preaches to 500 empty seats, because they used to be 5,000 members when the neighborhood was homogeneous. When everybody went to church and said, it all looks like me. Their value, we're going to reach our neighborhood, meant that when the neighborhood changed, the shift we needed to make was we had to acknowledge that we needed to reflect our neighborhood, not just the people who've been here historically. That's huge, right? It's a huge decision. And they decided, they held on to the value we're going to keep is we're going to be about our neighborhood. What we're going to change is we're no longer going to be focused on everybody who looks like us. And we're now going to find ourselves in a really profoundly interesting moment. People literally say to him, you're a great preacher. If you'd stop all that woke stuff, we could be 5,000 members again. Right? What values must change? What attitudes must shift? What behaviors must shift? Once you see the shift, then you can start working on the problem. So when you think about these challenges that are really, really complex, how do we get better leadership development? How do we work on and get more connection and deeper community with each other so the next time we go through a crisis, we're ready? How do we not depend upon our pastors so much as we appreciate them, but we develop something more deeply connected? How does our mission go into the world? You start asking deeper questions about the shifts you have to make. We have an entire process where we teach people. It's called getting up on the balcony. And in the book, one of the things you can begin to practice, and I know Ryan knows this stuff, is how you begin to look and see what you can't notice when you're down in the middle of the dance floor. So think of it like being an elder is like chaperoning a junior high dance. When you're out on the dance floor, fellowship hall, or in the pews, or choir practice, it's like a junior high dance. It's like music's loud, it's overwhelming, awkward bodies, Axe body spray. It's like, ooh, you can hear people talking, but you can't kind of take it all in. What happens if all of a sudden, if every time you gathered, you said, okay, we're going to take a deep breath, we're going to go up on the dance floor, off the dance floor, up onto the balcony, and we're going to see the bigger shifts. What do we see? What do we notice? Oh, those people in the corner, whatever they're doing, that's not good. We should probably get out there and figure that out. These people over here seem to be celebrating something. Does anybody know what that is that we could celebrate? There's somebody over here who seems to be crying. They left the dance floor crying. What's going on there? You start seeing the patterns. You start seeing stuff like, we have this tendency to lose people certain times of the year. We have this tendency for new people to feel awkward when they come here. What can we do about that? I had a mom in my church walk up to me and say, Pastor Todd, we've been praying for this family in our neighborhood. My kids play together in the cul-de-sac. I know they don't go to church. I've tried to talk to them about my faith, and they've never been interested. This last week, for the very first time, the kids said they wanted to come to our Sunday school because they heard about our program. And so the mom and dad said, okay, we'll go. And so I brought the family to church today. I went, oh my gosh. I go, how'd it go? She goes, it was really interesting. For one thing, I saw what our church is like if you've never been to a church. Like, I realized how awkward and how hard it is to be a family bringing your kids into our Sunday school. It's really, really hard. So I started writing down all the things that I saw that I didn't see before. I went, this is so great. Would you help us? We'll have a meeting. You'll be in charge. We'll put a group together. We'll try to change our Sunday school to be more welcoming to outsiders. Would you be willing to take that on? She looks at me and she goes, this is why I hate this church. I go, why? She goes, you can't come up with any kind of suggestion without people expecting you to do something about it. I went, I know, I think that's kind of how the Holy Spirit works. Like, she goes, well, then what do we pay you for? I didn't have an answer at the time, by the way. I didn't. I was flooded. I just was like, gone. Like, I was like, the Lord be with you. I walked away, right? I was like, yeah, right. But I have an answer now. And if anybody ever says this to you, now you can use this. You pay me to stand here and take that from you. So that you have enough time to see the shift God might want to do in your own heart. To hear, maybe God's calling you. Maybe the shift is it's not the pastor's job to solve everything. Maybe it's the need is going to be revealed to the person who feels it the most painfully. And that could be the invitation to not have to do it alone, but to step into leadership. Maybe leadership doesn't mean you have a name tag or a corner office or a mailbox or heavy furniture. Maybe leadership is just the capacity to see a need and convene people to make it better. And we want as much leadership as possible. See the shift before you start solving the problem. What value, what attitude, what behavior? So what I want you to do is just spend a couple of minutes talking about this. We're going to take a little break. I want you to just think about this whole notion of what it would mean for you to start thinking differently about your problems, even the problems we've had. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to just take a couple of minutes and just reflect upon what you've heard. I've given you just a lot about a different way of thinking about leadership. And so here's some prompts, pretty easy. I used these prompts when I taught Bible for a Christian school, a Christian high school. For 1 year, I taught the Bible. I was sitting there being a pastor, just minding my own business, and a woman in the church walks up to me and says, hey, I'm going to be the new principal at your daughter's school. And I said, congratulations, they need a new principal. That other guy was a clown. And said, okay. I said, well, if as the parent and as a pastor, what do you think we could do better? And I went, well, you could be better at Bible than we are at football. This little church was great in school. It was great in sports. We killed the Lutherans in football. But our Bible program was terrible. And next thing I know, I'm teaching the Bible, right? See the shift. God spoke to you, right? So I gave the kids a big old fat Bible with margins, and I told them, you're going to read the Bible. Not what the youth pastor told you was in the Bible. You're going to read the Bible. You're smart kids. When you come across something that just inspires you, you took a note, you texted it to a friend, you underlined it, you highlighted it, maybe you want to tattoo it on your body, whatever it is, just inspire. If you're going along reading in the Bible and all of a sudden you have a question, I'm confused, feels dumb to ask. What's an Uman? What's a Thummim? What's the difference between a Sadducee and a Pharisee? Put a question mark. I said, if you're reading along in your Bible and you come across something and it really bothers you, it irks you, you're like, wait a second. They got to kill everybody when they go into that promised land? Everybody? You got to kill everybody? That's like genocide. And you got to kill all the animals too. You got to kill the pets. You got to not only do genocide, you got to kill all the golden retrievers. What the Do not put a cuss word in the Bible. But I taught them that when I was a kid, we had this little mark for cuss words in comic books. What created dissonance? What's rubbed you wrong? What have you heard me say? Maybe you're bugged at the way I said it. Maybe you're bugged at the reality. Maybe you think I'm being too glib or too simplistic or too idealistic or whatever. It just kind of bothers you. Look at my face. I like irks. They're my favorite. I love stuff like this. And lastly, require. Where's the nudge of the Holy Spirit that might be encouraging you to change? We talked about at the very beginning, if we climb a new curve, what's going to require of you? In my shout out to math teachers everywhere, I taught them the delta sign, which is a symbol of change. What I want you to do is just take a few minutes at your table, listen to what we've talked about a changing world, a kind of leadership, a way of leading differently, what it's going to require of us. And I want you to spend about 5 or 6 minutes just at your tables, pick one prompt, just one of them, and just share them together. Inspire, inquire, irk, require, and just share them together. And we'll just give you 5 or 6 minutes around the table to just check in. Then we'll debrief it a little bit, and then we'll take our next break, and then that'll give us a running head start into the last piece until we finished at noon. Okay? So they got to take a few minutes just for each other. Go ahead. Okay, so let me pull us back together. What I would like to do is hear from one person at each table. You can pick any one of the prompts. We'll do at least one round. Pick any of the prompts. You can be inspired, you can be irked, you can ask a question, whatever it is, but one person from each table. So if you guys all need to pick somebody, that's okay with me. But if somebody wants to volunteer from each table, that would be great. So I'm going to start with your table over here. So, you sat up in the front. That's why Presbyterians sit in the back. Because this thing. You want to go ahead?
Okay, well, we
What did you guys talk about? If there's something you talk about most, you can do that. If not, you just can share your own.
We talked a lot about engaging the community beyond our walls. And
Yeah.
about what it's like to come here as a new person, as a visitor and inquirer. And
Yeah.
really,
I'll
my voice?
yeah.
That's surprising. We talked a lot about engagement, and like folks that would visit here or inquire here and what their experience would be, and how church needs to be really more about relationship than just programmatic stuff, and some creative ideas started to percolate about ways to be more intentional about that kind of engagement and relationship.
So you guys jumped right to the require. We're already starting to think of changes we need to do.
It was Debbie's fault.
It was Debbie's fault. She's like, forget this processing stuff. Let's get some stuff done.
Ryan and I really wanted to be early inquiring.
Yeah, but no. Debbie's like, we're gonna get it done. All right, let's get to work. Okay, all right. That's awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go over here to you guys. Pick one of the prompts. One of the people. Go ahead.
I'm not sure which one we picked. We started at IRC, and then we went to Inquire, and now we're back. I think we're at Require.
Well, okay. You
I
just.
apologize.
It's really okay. It's all just a tool. So.
I think we kind of, why aren't we more multi-generational?
Okay. Yep.
We've got this great nursery school program.
Mm-hmm.
It's very separate from
Yep.
what we do as
Yep.
a church. And then how can we open ourselves, the physical facilities,
Yep.
to the community as
Yep.
a whole?
Yep. So one of the things that starts happening is when you stop feeling like you need to solve a problem, you can actually start getting curious about problems. Right? You can actually start wondering about them. So one of the parts that that you'll see in the book that we talk a lot about is we use this diagram. We say a way of stopping the default to old best practices. Right? So you go, so how can we be multi-generational? And somebody goes, I know what we can do. You know what they do at my sister-in-law's church? And you're, okay, we're back here again, right? So instead of doing that, actually there's a process you can go through. And where you get to eventually is to questions. The gold is when you get to, what's the question I'm curious about? Like, I wonder why people who come here, who know us, we're down here in downtown, why do people walk by us and feel like we're not approachable? What is that about, right? Why does our facility, what is it about the way in which we show up in the world? What is the way in which we communicate who we are? Or what is it about the world where you can't just put out a flag that says all are welcome and they're going to show up? I mean, it's like the idea that, if we do a pancake breakfast and get them on our campus, we're all going to come. I'm thinking, I used to flip for the pancake breakfast in my kids' elementary school, and I never wanted to do the 4th grade again, right? I never once thought, oh my gosh, I should go back and do this. Never, right? So what you start realizing is when you don't have to have an answer, you can actually start asking new questions, right? And it gives you different possibilities to think about things. Yeah, really beautiful. Good. Where'd you guys go? Inspire, inquire, irk, require?
I think that our main topic sort of covers all of this.
Okay.
Because the adaptive change that the church made in order during COVID to make things remote, and people to be able to participate from the living room.
Yep.
And as it has grown, we find it irking.
Yeah.
Because people no longer, they feel like, oh, yeah, I go to church, I watch it on something.
Yeah.
You lose so much
Yep.
of the community by attending meetings remotely.
Yep.
Everything that is, you lose that personal connection.
Yep.
So we were inspired, and now we're.
Now your mind. Okay. Yeah, awesome. Beautiful. Okay, so here's what I want you to notice. Notice this thing. This is what happens when you start learning how to reflect the way we just talked about this, right? The way we talked about this. When you start going, okay, let's observe some stuff. Let's just do the next time we have a conversation about, let's just talk about remote, right? Where you're going to all want to go to is, you know what's wrong with this? I get it, because there's stuff that's wrong. But what you're going to miss is, let's just observe some stuff. Like, I hear people saying that they can stay more connected to us over the miles. I see people who used to be here in person now staying home. Right? Complexify the conversation. Get more observations. The goal is to get as many as possible. Quantity over quality. Anytime you're taking on a challenge, anything you want to take on, like I love this notion of we started this thing during COVID. Now we have these remote services. We have streaming. Almost everybody I know, their streaming service has like 14 people on it, but we can't dare shut it down or whatever. And we're not quite sure if we want to shut it down, and we're not sure what we think about that. And sometimes we like it and we don't. Well, instead of making a decision about it or trying to think that data will solve it, make observations about it. Go talk to people about it. Go on the dance floor. Go talk to the people who are using the technology. Get up on the balcony. I notice people made connections over committees and meetings and service. They don't have the same connections. Then go to interpretations and get diverse interpretations. Obviously, like whenever you're trying to do stuff like, well, we really want to reach young people. Okay, have we asked young people their interpretation, right? Get to questions you want to wonder about and then try experiments. Like I am absolutely convinced that we're going to figure out some way to use streaming technology in a better way than we use it now. And I'm convinced that it's going to be part of every church in the future. And I'm convinced that we're not going to use it in the same way we thought we'd use it. It's almost true with every technology, by the way. So think about a microwave oven. When microwave ovens first came out, there used to be commercials and stuff like, look, you can do your whole Thanksgiving dinner in 25 minutes, right? And no one nukes a turkey. I mean, no one who cares about food nukes a turkey, right? Everybody has a microwave oven, but they use it for like 2 or 3 things, right? The popcorn button, the defrost button, milk, like a couple of things, right? Right? What's that? Reheat the coffee, right? Like no one cooks a whole meal, and no one goes into apartments and says, all I need is a microwave oven. But there also, almost no one lives without a microwave oven. I mean, some people do, but very Luddite. Very few people do. Like you rightly saying technology is going to be like that. Learning is going to be like that. Make the emphasis learning. And we start acting. We have some things we're learning that we're just at the beginning of learning. It's just great. Yeah. I actually think, one of the parts I want to just say this is, I actually think the future of almost everything formative is going to be hybrid. There's going to be something technological and something relational, both. And you see this because the most common way that people use, say, like meetup apps, they use technology is to meet people in real life. Like we have these longings for relationship. What's now is we don't have to be forced to be in relationship with people we want to, like at a committee meeting. Like we can actually do some stuff, right? So it allows us, so again, being curious. What's the shift we need to make? What's the thing we have to do? How do we think about it differently? Not just defaulting, but getting curious about it. Letting the irks drive us to other questions. It becomes a really important skill set. Awesome. Let's go back here. Yep.
You talked about how inspiring we have a new wonderful leader.
Yeah.
But there do seem to be things that we could start doing quickly
Uh-huh.
to implement that
Yep.
don't require a lot of effort,
Yep.
but that we aren't doing.
Okay, so here, this is so great because I even skipped these slides and now I get to talk about them. In the 1990s, the leadership thing that if a guy like me would come in the 1990s and talk to you, what they would talk about was what I call the Wayne Gretzky School of Leadership. Wayne Gretzky said, why are you the greatest hockey player ever? He said, my dad taught me to skate to where the puck is going. So leadership was about, can we discern where the future is and get there first? Now we live in a world with 14 pucks. And the ice the skating rink is under perpetual fog. We have no idea where the puck is going. So instead of trying to predict the future, you instead experiment your way into the future. So one of the questions we can ask is, we always tell people, don't predict, prototype. Prototypes come out of the tech world. Do a small, cheap experiment. Don't build a new building. Don't hire anybody, fire anybody, start a new foundation, have a capital campaign. Do something small. Like, I was doing this in Silicon Valley with a group of tech folks, and they're like, look, fail fast, learn fast. Like, just do something small. Fail fast, learn fast. Fail fast, learn fast. Finally, one guy goes, and fail cheap. It's my money, right? So just ask yourself, what can we experiment with? What do we want to launch? We're not quite sure if we're ready to launch it yet, but we'll try some small thing. And we teach people a process of doing this, where you literally learn. When we do our consulting phase, our phase 2 now is what we call our prototype phase. We actually have gotten really good at teaching people how to do small experiments where you're focused on learning. Like, what can you do with, I actually was in a group and I asked the budget, the treasurer, I said, how much money would you want people to experiment with? He goes, $1,000. I said, $1,000? How about 100? You get $100, you get 1 hour of staff time, and you get 1 month to pull something off around a question that you want to explore. What would happen? What would you want to explore? What do you want to try? What do you want to see?
Can I add
Right?
one thing to that, Todd?
Yeah. Yeah.
Any experiment will fail if you don't have a theory of the case on the front end. You
Yeah.
have to think, what do I think I'm going to learn?
Uh-huh.
Because if without that, you won't learn anything.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to, like, I'll just give you an example. We had all these kids, we had this coffee hour, a lot of people at coffee hour, but people's kids just left because they had to go places. So we had this experiment where people said, well, let's put a table with better snacks for kids and have them take that. And Todd said to me privately, he said, what's going to happen is you're going to have kids walking off with expensive snacks in their pockets. So what they did was then because they were just like, if we have better snacks, but they didn't have a theory of the case, so finally Ashley said, I think what we really think is if we have better snacks and a kid's table, they'll sit there and the parents will talk to people. So they moved a kid's table to the middle of the room, where you had to go to the middle of the room. All these kids sat at this table. All their parents sat around them, and all the older people around them talked to the kids. But they didn't get to a useful experiment until they thought, when they first did it, they're just, let's just try this, but they didn't think, what we want to learn is, we think parents will stay if the kids sit at this table.
Yeah.
Which is, and it costs virtually nothing to do it.
Yeah, but it took one cycle of going, okay, we just paid for a lot of expensive snacks.
Yeah.
Now that didn't work. Now what do we want to try next?
And it also took knowing what the question is at the front end that you think you're going to answer. And then you can answer something else. Sometimes you get a different answer. But
Yep. It's a great, once you start realizing, when you start talking about experiments, here's just a little pro tip. Do not ever ask, so did it work? Ask instead, what did we learn? What did we learn? That they went, okay, we learned if you put a big fancy table with fancy snacks, kids will take them on the way to soccer. If you want parents to stay and talk with each other, move the kids to the center of the room. Now they will. At the church that I served, we actually did that with the play area. We moved the play area to the center of our patio. We literally built a play area next to the patio because the kids would all want to be in the play area, and parents would do this. Well, at least I can get them to take a nap later. How are you? And then they would meet each other, right? Like, you don't have to start by building an expensive play area. You could just start by moving a table, right? Just learn how to experiment. Don't predict, prototype. Learn how to experiment your way forward. You'll find there's so much. One of the stories I often tell, and I'll tell you this one because it comes out of it, is we were struggling with trying to reach young adults. That was one of the things we were struggling with at our church. We had a really booming youth program, and then it felt like they just fell off at about age 25, like just 24, 25, just fell off. And people are like, oh, that's every church, and they'll all come back when they want to have their babies baptized. No, they didn't. They were not coming back. And we're like, okay. So we tried to ask this question. Well, we were stuck. My worship leader at the time was 29. She was a 29-year-old worship leader leading our church. She was incredibly gifted. She was turning 30. She had a 30-year-old birthday party, her birthday party for herself at 30, and she invited my wife and me. And we were like 50. And I said, okay, we are not going to that party. Nothing will kill a party more than having your pastor, who's your boss, who's 50, coming to a party with a bunch of 30-year-olds. Like, we will kill that party. She's just being polite. So I said, let's get her a gift. We'll drop by the party, we'll drop it off, no one's gonna know us anyway, and we'll sneak in, we'll drop off the gift, and we'll hug her, and we'll tell her that we've got another important thing we have to go to, and we'll have dinner reservations 15 minutes for later that we have to go to, right? So we walk in the door, and I knew everybody. Then literally a group of people went, Pastor Todd, Brianne said you were coming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know all these people. They were all kids who'd grown up in my youth group who now hadn't been there in like 10 years. And they were like, we heard you were coming. I'm so glad. And a bunch of them sat down and said, will you stay? Because I want to connect with you. And all of a sudden, I'm having these conversations with these 30-year-olds. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, first of all, I thought they wouldn't know me. Second of all, if they knew me, I thought it'd be awkward. Third, if it's not awkward, I thought they'd be like mad at me. Like, I don't go to your church because you're like an old, mean Presbyterian person, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, none of those things are true. So my brain is in a cramp all weekend long. I go to Brianne and I said to Brianne, this is what happened. And she goes, and I told her the same story, and she goes, I know, and I didn't sleep all weekend because now you know that I can't even reach my friends. My friends don't come to this church, and you hired me to help us, to have a worship leader who will help us reach our friends. And that's not working. One of our theories of change was if we had a younger worship leader in our contemporary service, that they would be attracted to their friends. She says, I can't do it. I said, there's two things I know. One, I know that you're really great. And two, I now know they like me too. So it's not you and me. That's not the problem. And I don't know what the problem is. So what if we asked some of them if they'd be willing to meet with me, and I could just ask them questions, get curious. And she picked 6 people, and I said, I'll buy the pizza and you come. And we met 3 times, and it cost me 3 pizzas. And then we figured out why young people weren't coming to church. And I'm not going to tell you. Because the idea is the process, not the result. All weed cost us 3 pizzas. 3 pizzas, 3 evenings, 3 conversations, and one of those folks ended up becoming an elder in the life of our church. Like, we figured it out because we asked questions and experimented. Learning how to be expert experimenters rather than expert with the answers. Okay, I didn't get to all with you, but I will come back. But I want us to take a little break. It is just now 11. I'd like you to go take 5 minutes. If you just need to stretch, whatever, 5 minutes, because then we're going to go till noon, and they might not have a chance to break again. But I'd like you to take just a 5-minute stretch break. We'll be back, and we'll go over the last hour together. Okay? I did not get every table the last time through. I think they got 2 more tables I want to hear from. So. Oh, you're welcome.
Really
You're very welcome. Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure indeed. Okay, so let's see. These 2 tables we didn't have a chance to hear from. So somebody from Inspire, requires somebody from your table. Would you guys let you guys be next? So either summarize or pick up one person. Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah.
The big question was
How do we do this? Yeah.
But we also tried to require, because we've all felt a realization, yes, there's this need, and yes, we want to do something about it.
Yes.
But the inquiry was really, and we were looking at the 4 thrusts of the church worship here.
Right.
Music and talking about how Jesus took the 10 Commandments and made them 2. Maybe we should take the 4 and go smaller.
Yeah.
So we went to worship and building community.
Yeah.
A focus that
Yeah.
Brian seems to be working on, the community internal, the community external.
Yeah. So already starting to think about what is it we can do. So one of the things we'll talk about is I have a little book, the little yellow book in the series, The Mission Always Wins, that we talk about, which is a way in which you think about how to make decisions, is what that's always about. And this becomes a really powerful set of questions. Once you start asking good questions, how do we do this? One of the ways you do this is by not doing what you always do. right? So not solving so I always say, see the shift before you solve the problem. Try not to solve the problem. Notice how quickly we want to get to solutions. I mean, we do. I mean, it's just human nature. I mean, every good leader I know, and you guys wouldn't be elders of a church if you weren't, has a little voice in their head that says, don't just stand there, do something, right? And I actually want to encourage you to hear a different voice. Let it be mine. Don't just do something. Stand there. Stand there for just a minute and ask, okay, so what shift do we need to see? What problem are we trying to solve? What is this thing? What would happen if we tried this? What would be different? And really begin to think through the process of beginning to ask some larger questions. And about how those questions will lead you. Like the how is really interesting, because the how is really about leading differently. It's about shifting the way we usually lead. And let's face it, for most of us, that's really hard. It's just really, really hard. So this allows us to get curious, lets us try some things, let's experiment things. I'll give you one example from one church I worked with. We were talking about what could we experiment with? And we had the conversation. I said, well, how many of you have a process, have like a practice of giving up something for Lent? And almost everybody did, yeah. Coffee, chocolate, Facebook, whatever, right? Okay. I said, okay, what if this year, because the thing we're really working on is we all feel like we're really, really busy and we don't feel like we get to be able to focus as deeply on our relationships with each other and with the Lord. So what if we gave up meetings for Lent? And people are like, yes, what a great idea. 6 weeks, no meetings. And eventually goes, yes. And then what happens is the finance committee goes, well, we have to meet. Then there's going to be somebody like, well, buildings and grounds has got to meet. And then next thing you know is, well, we're planning Easter, so worship has to meet. And, well, okay, what if we all have meetings, but we'll just have them shorter? And we realize, okay, what is it about that, right? I was thinking almost every church I know doesn't have any meetings in July or August or something. Like, oh, what if we said for 6 weeks as a spiritual practice, we're just not going to have any meetings for 6 weeks. And when we come back, we'll ask, what did we learn? And we learned, okay, 6 weeks is a little bit too long, or 6 weeks was not long enough, or we didn't need all those meetings. Or if we didn't have this meeting, what we lost is this. Like when we started doing PowerPoint, we had a group of people who had been bulletin stuffers. They were bulletin stuffers. And I remember going to them, I said, oh my gosh, we're going to free up those ladies. They're going to get a whole day back. Like they don't have to stuff the bulletins anymore because we're going to do it all in PowerPoint. What we found out is that bulletin stuffing was their small group. Right? Oh, wait a second. By taking away the task, we're like, well, you guys can just meet. They're like, well, we meet to stuff the bulletin. So we literally created some stuff for them to stuff, right? Just stuff something. We didn't need a bulletin, but you guys will be the stuffers or whatever we need, because we didn't want to take away this thing that was theirs, but we also weren't going to hold back, right? So the more you start observing, the more you start experimenting, the more you start learning, you move as fast as it takes to learn. And man, then things start to move. Because we're learning more, we're trying more things, we're doing more things. So, right back here. You guys are the last group. Pick one person, pick one thing. You guys have had all this time to prepare. Yeah.
So Craig made an interesting comment in our last discussion, and that was the formation of commonplace.
Yeah.
Energy and momentum around all that.
Around commonplace?
Yeah, so it got me thinking in terms of, wow, it was something outward. It was something that brought people together. And then so that was the inspire part. And then the inquire was, wow, a lot of people don't even know we're here.
Right.
This huge building, where's Wayne Press? Who knows? How do you get into the building?
Actually, I can tell you that one personally. If you take an Uber, they drop you out there, and you guys looked really great walking across there. As I was the guy going, finally I thought, okay, they think I'm a homeless person. I'll go around the back of the church. So yeah.
In terms of the earth, people, they don't know us. They think that, these Christians, and look at this, this building they're in, and who are they, and they don't,
Yeah.
Yeah. People don't know that we're actually,
Yeah.
I was actually repeating
people are skeptical about. You know, what's that big building? Why do they do what they do? They're just focused on each other.
Yeah.
Why, maybe they're judging us because we all know Christians are judging, right?
Yeah, they're in there judging us.
And why don't they pay taxes?
And why don't they pay taxes? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, really. That's
So
it.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna stop there because
Yeah.
I think just the very activity of asking questions and making observations is what I'm
Boom.
getting at.
Yeah. Okay, this is great. This is where I want to take this last hour, because I want to help you like with one of the most significant shifts you can begin to make that we just see in almost every environment. I mean, it's just every single environment. So here's the way to think about this. Here's the way to think forward. So a couple of thoughts. We talked about adaptive leadership. When you start trying to identify an adaptive challenge, is it an expert or not? There's some lists of things that you can look at. Like if we find ourselves trying the same thing over and over again but harder. Like, you know what we'll do this time? We'll get sausage and bacon. That'll bring people out, right? Well, come on, you know, like that'll be great. We'll get a professional comedian. You know, Hal's funny, but he's a little tired, right? If you try the same things harder, you probably have an adaptive challenge you're trying to solve with a technical solution. If you solve an adaptive challenge with a technical solution, it's like putting a Band-Aid on something that is actually deeper. So let me just say this, many times this is actually what we ask our staff to be. We hired you. We want younger families, so we hired you. You got young kids, that's it. So what else do we need to do? Like you're the reason, right? That's the technical solution for the adaptive challenge. That's looking for a hero with a silver bullet. Oh, we've got you. Pining for the glory days. Today's problems are usually built on yesterday's successes. I worked with a large Methodist church in Houston. We did our usual process where we come in, we do surveys, we do focus groups, we do all that so everybody in the church can talk. We're just like, you're going to have a lot of conversations where we're going to raise every issue we possibly can. It's going to be, anybody's going to get a voice. We tell people, you get your say, but you don't get your way, right? The session's going to make the decisions, but anybody who wants to can say anything they want. We have a process of doing it. Nobody gets mean or anything, and we figure out a way to do it. And we got really clear, and the people said, here's our challenge. I mean, you could feel the anxiety in the room. You could just feel the energy. Was we used to have the biggest youth group in the city. They had 300 kids. They built a building for their youth group. They have their own youth building. This church was so committed to young people and to kids that they built a building. And they're like, we have got to get that building filled again because we are no longer. They have 50 kids in their youth program, which almost any church would take in a heartbeat. And yet they were saying, we used to have 300. And so we started asking questions like, so what do you observe? What do you think? And people are doing this, like, you know what we got to do? They're giving us solutions. And the solution was, we got to get back our Wesley choir. Methodist, Charles Wesley, yeah. Okay, well, what's the Wesley choir? Oh, man, you can't believe this. 20 years ago, we had 100 kids a week. 100 kids a week used to sing at the 8 o'clock service every Sunday morning. Parents got up, kids got up, they would sing. Oh my God, 100 kids a week. That's when we were booming with kids. If we got the Wesley choir back, I'm like, so you got rid of the Wesley choir? Yeah, kids hated it, so we got rid of the Wesley choir. They stopped singing. But we got to get it back. I'm like, okay, so tell me what you've done. Well, you know, people longed for that day. They talked about that Wesley choir. You know who really longed for that day? The old people who were 40. They had sung in the Wesley choir 20 years ago. And they got 11, 12, 13-year-olds, and they're going, my daughter's not going to have that the way I had that. So we said, well, what was so great about it? And they went, the Wesley choir was the place where all the committed kids, if you were a Christian, you knew if you went in the Wesley choir, they'd find other Christian kids because you had to show up at rehearsal every single week. And it's also a place that was stunning because we went on trips, we went on mission trips and stuff, and every single kid in the Wesley choir learned how to give their testimony. Because at any moment you could be pointed at and you could be asked, you share about the hope that's within you. So you learned how to share your faith. And what's amazing is parents were so committed to the Wesley choir that we ended up with a lot of parents who, they didn't care much about choir, but they were like, we got part-time jobs and internships and they were college references and it was amazing. They're telling us all these things. And I'm listening and we're jotting down notes and I said, so here's an observation. None of you talked about singing. What was great about the Wesley choir wasn't singing, it was mentoring. It It was a place where kids who were committed to their faith had something they could contribute to the church. So what is it that we could hold on to that's really important today that the Wesley Choir did back then? That's the challenge all the time. That's the adaptation. It was about mentoring. It was about relationships. It was about discipleship. But it did it in such a way that connected. Trying to get kids to sing in that choir today it had gone down for years. They finally mercifully killed it so they could start a new curve, right? Pining for the glory days, and nobody really knows what to do. And there's just a chorus of complaints. People are just wondering, you know, you probably have an adaptive challenge because you can't solve it. When you start solving adaptive challenges, you get this list. All of a sudden you realize elephants in the room are named. We can say stuff out loud, like, you know what, we think we're really friendly, but when we start talking to people, they don't think we're all that friendly. You know, we're friendly to people like us. I realized that I went to San Clemente, this beautiful little beach town, and people were like, you're going to love it here. It's the best place ever. You're never going to want to leave. This is the friendliest place ever. And I'm walking out onto the patio, and I'm realizing everybody's talking to each other. So we got a whole greeting team to greet people, and they were all talking to each other. The greeting team loved being with each other. Finally, we realized, okay, I got to get. So what we did is we found 2 couples from the Midwest, one from North Dakota and one from Iowa. We said, can we put a name tag on you and make you greeters? Just do what you do every Sunday anyway. They're like, hi, welcome to the church. They're from the Midwest. They were just great. We had to create like events to get people to meet each other. Like, you ever done like dinners for 8? Sign up and you can be with 2 other couples and you can meet people. We had to have like a person in charge of that. We had to have a person in charge of media for that. We had a person who was in charge of the treasurer for that. We had to have a vice chair of the dinner for 8 committee. It's what churches in the South do just every Sunday morning. Want to go to lunch? Sure. Like it's remedial. Programs are remedial. We had to have programs because we weren't very good at being friendly. Name the elephant in the room. We're not as friendly as we think we are, or whatever it is. Responsibility for the organization's future is shared. You guys were talking about this earlier, right? We depended on our pastors too much. We didn't have enough. Like, what if you thought that one of our goals is we want a lot of people to love and care for this church? We had one church that they brought us in to consult with one goal. We want the whole congregation, or as much of the congregation as possible, to share the mission, because the same 10 people are exhausted. So instead of haranguing, we thought, what would it take for them to make a shift where everybody shared responsibility for the mission? It took us 18 months, but we got them there. Independent judgment is expected. That means people can say what they think, and it can be different. Leadership capacity is developed. We actually are intentional about developing our leadership capacity. And this idea of reflection and continuous learning is institutionalized. We're always reflecting. You don't learn from experience, you learn by reflecting on your experience. So how do you start having more and more meetings where you're saying, okay, what did we learn? What did we learn? What did we learn? What are we aware of? We have this thing we tell people to do, which is get a whiteboard and make a goal that your church is going to learn 50 things this year, 1 a week. Somebody learns something doing an experiment, they write it up on the board. You don't have to learn anything during Christmas or Easter. You get 2 weeks off. But the rest of the time you can just learn. You're learning. All we're doing is, like, how are we going to know the year was good? We learned 50 things this year. Like stuff like, we shouldn't plan a potluck on the Eagles parade day. Good idea. Don't do that, right? Right? Okay, whatever. Like, we learned. One of my coaches who's on my team, who is one of the coaches who works on my team, she's a Presbyterian pastor who is a single mom who adopted a girl from Ethiopia. Her daughter is now 14 years old, and she has stage 3 breast cancer. So her daughter is, you can imagine, is just devastated. Like, the only mom she's ever known in this is got cancer, and she's old enough to know. So Heather, who's on one of our coaches, said, we put up a whiteboard, and I said to Hannah, we're going to learn everything we can about cancer, everything that cancer teaches us. Because when you learn, you get more resilient and you go forward. So they started putting this down. I said, what's the first thing you put on the board? She said, I put this down. When people send me flowers, I'm happy, and Hannah gets sad. I said, why? She says, Hannah thinks that everybody is just focused on me and not her. So what we learned is, instead of giving me expensive flowers, send me a Grubhub gift card so I can order ice cream to be delivered. And we eat the ice cream and we talk about how much people love you so she doesn't feel alone. Write it on the board. What did we learn? What did we learn? You move, learning makes you resilient. Learning takes you forward. Leadership, you lead the learning. You're not the expert, you're the expert learners, right? I had to learn this the hard way because I work at a seminary and we're all really smart and we think we know everything. So the seminary put me in charge of a project, which was our enrollment is in decline. Fuller Seminary was at one time the largest non-denominational seminary in the world. And we loved that idea. And we were big. We had about 4,000 full-time equivalent students. And we have shrunk significantly. We're still a pretty big school compared to other seminaries. We got like about, I think now we're down to 1,800 or 1,400 or 1,500, somewhere in there. But we were shrinking. And they said, Todd, we want you to actually, your team, to look at that. Like, what is going on? And I said, I'm not an enrollment person. They said, no, don't look at enrollment. Do that adaptive thing you do to look at underlying issues, right? Do that thing. Like, we'll work on the enrollment stuff, the marketing and all that. But we want you to work on this. So I put a team together and we started asking, what is it that we, like, what can we actually meet? What can we actually care about people? What should we learn from people about this process? And I put this presentation together. I took it to the Board of Trustees. And when I finished, they voted in that my team could work on this problem. And they gave me a tiny little bit of budget, just a tiny bit. Like, you're going to have to go raise the rest of it. Okay, I'll go raise the rest of it. And a guy walks up to me and goes, guys, I'm a lawyer in Silicon Valley. And what you're describing is doing something really, really innovative in a really, really traditional institution. That almost never works. Remember the Saturn car? He said the Saturn car was developed by General Motors to compete with Japanese imports. And they created this whole different line of car for that reason. And in 1994, it was the number 6 leading car in America. But in 2008, in the economic crisis, they sold it off for parts to protect their legacy brands. He goes, you're going to be the Saturn of Fuller Seminary. I said, now that's terrible. He said, would you like to learn from people who do innovation full-time all the time? I said, yes. So I fly to Silicon Valley, Los Angeles up to Silicon Valley, which is the San Jose area. Spend a day like this, just a day with a group of people. All of them are entrepreneurs or venture capitalists, or they work in the tech industry, all the companies we know. And they said, and they were all Christians, and they all knew that we were going to work on this problem about theological education. And they said, Todd, here's what we want. We want you to bring a presentation to frame up the problem. We want you to give us your first best idea, and we want you to tell us your idea. You have 10 minutes, and tell us why you think this is such a good idea, we should fund it. I went, you're going to fund it? They go, no, we're not going to fund it. But this is just the way we think about this. Is it worthy of putting money behind? I went, okay. I gave 10 minutes, gave my pitch, did the best I possibly could, finished, I was all happy, and then I had that moment where they're all looking at each other like, somebody gonna tell him? I'm like, what? And one of the guys literally says, I've got my clicker, one of the guys literally says, he says, Todd, you've been doing that talk around the seminary a lot, right? I said, yeah, you can't get anything done at the seminary unless you get all the faculty on board. I had to convince them it's worth doing. Then I had to get the development office on board. I got to raise all the money, and you're not giving me any. And I've got to hire staff on what's called soft money, which means if I don't raise their salary, they lose their job. So they got to go from hard, firm money to soft money. Follow me? Yeah, I've been doing that a lot. He goes, oh, that makes sense. You just gave us an entire presentation on if we don't do this, the seminary won't survive. Todd, nobody cares if your institution survives. They only care if your institution cares about them. Nobody cares if your institution survives. They only care if your institution cares about them. He said, literally, get outside and find out what they care about. I guarantee you nobody in this town cares about Wayne Presbyterian Church. Some will have memories. They'll came here, it's great. I went there once. The boys, the scouting, the meet there, it's awesome. But there's just as many people who think, oh, this would be great if we turned that into a really cool brew pub and community center and it paid taxes, right? They only care if we care about them. Go ahead.
Can I add something to your list?
Please.
Jim, maybe you need to close your ears. But quality over quantity.
About what?
Well, we're big on numbers.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
How many people went to every class? We used to have somebody who walked around on Sunday morning and counted everybody in every group.
Yeah.
And we reported it.
Yeah. So what I would say is one of the things you have to do is I actually think that measuring is really important. I think we haven't figured out what really counts.
Right.
So figuring out what really counts is the thing. Then figure out what we want to measure.
But if the quality for 12 people works as opposed to 25 people,
Yeah.
which we have these debates about what room are we going to meet in for what class based on how many people we think is going to show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the old school of being here.
Yeah.
You know, adult ed meetings, we talk about how many numbers were in each class.
Yeah.
We spend maybe more time on that than we do on what should we be offering.
Yeah. So one of the things I'd have you do is say, as you start doing experiments, start asking what should we be measuring? And one of the reasons why we measure the old, bucks and buns is because it's easier to measure people in the pew and dollars in the plate than it is intangible things like are people growing or not? Or do people care about us or not? Or are we making an impact or
But
not?
the quality, isn't the quality what makes people care about the institution?
Well, I'll tell you this. I actually don't think that matters.
Okay.
I actually think quality can be. I think quality is. I often say to people, you want as much data as you possibly can. You want as much quantity as you can. Then what you want to ask is what really matters. So, for example, there are a whole churches we've done who have done. We bring in a professional orchestra to do an excellent Christmas thing to offer to the community. It costs us a lot of money, and then we ask, okay, is it worth spending that much money for this event? When we might have gotten the exact same thing by doing like hot chocolate and a sing-along.
Well, that's what I mean by quality.
Yeah.
Quality is the internal.
Okay, so once you get clear, So once you get really clear on what's our reason for doing it, why are we doing it? I use that example of the choir thing because when I got to San Clemente Press, they told me, oh, we have this great choir and we do this big musical thing, and it costs us $25,000 a year, and it's our gift to the community. And they had like 2,000 people a year show up for this Christmas concert. So I started having people count it, and I said to them, this is what I want you to do. I want you to count how many people come more than once. And what we discovered was about 400 people came 5 times. It really was the family members and friends of the choir, which was beautiful, but it wasn't an outreach. It was something else. And once we decided that that something else was that we wanted our choir, that were the hardest working group in our church, to give them a gift every year, which is they wanted to sing their faith for their family and friends. That we could give them. But we couldn't afford $25,000 a year out of the evangelism budget. So now they have a hard conversation about what is quality. That's the part I want to come back to. Yeah. The part I want you to keep hearing about is there's a huge thing that when leaders get to this place, we have a tendency to think if we can solve the pain inside the organization, then everything's going to be fine. And what I want you to understand is you will better solve the challenges inside the church by going outside for a while, by getting better and better and better of listening to your neighbors. We have an entire process we teach people about like go ask questions in your community. I do not need you to knock on doors. I don't need you to like set up a Girl Scout cookie stand. I don't need you to do a survey. I want you to go talk to anybody you know who doesn't go to this church, and do not ask them about the church. And we give you 3 or 4 questions about them. And we tell you, bring it back. Give us all of it. And when we're done, we're going to be asking this question, where's the pain point in the community that our church could meet as a way of showing how much we care? And that is a shift. That is immediately the shift about going outside for a while. So the questions you're always asking come down to stuff like this. What's the mission? What's the thing we got to keep doing? For Lewis and Clark, their mission, they were told, was find a water route. They actually had a deeper mission. They were commissioned to find a water route, but they didn't come back because their mission that was built on their values was something deeper than that. Thomas Jefferson had tutored Meriwether Lewis in the White House, and he had Enlightenment values. Now, those aren't necessarily Christian values, but they were values, right? We can have a whole debate over how much that aligns or not. It's kind of an interesting one, but it was their values. And the deepest Enlightenment value was the growth of human knowledge will lead to the growth of human happiness. So their biggest value was growing in knowledge. One of what they measured, what are we learning? What do we capture? They were literally capturing. We saw a new thing. It's called a prairie dog. We saw this animal. It was called this. We got this. It was this. It was this. That's what they were doing. When they got to the top of the Lemhi Pass and they realized there was no water route, they didn't go back because they actually had a deeper mission. The mission was learn everything you possibly can. Send it back to Thomas Jefferson, the Enlightenment man, and we'll build a world where people are happy. Now, we can argue about that, but we have a deeper mission than just how many people are in the pews. I get asked all the time, this is the most depressing thing I'm going to say, but it's true. Adaptive leadership cannot guarantee that your church won't die. Paul's churches are dead. But we're here. We're here. One of the questions we got to keep asking ourselves is, what's our mission? What are we about? What's the most important thing that we can do? What do we preserve no matter what? And then what are we willing to let go of? What are we willing to, what's a canoe? What's the thing we've got to drop? If the mountains of the world has changed, what's the canoe? If you came on this trip because it was a canoe trip, it's a really depressing moment when all of a sudden you find you got the Rocky Mountains in front of you. Right? Like you came on this trip, you're the extra canoeer. Now somebody come back and go, you're not going to believe this, but we're going to have to probably burn those canoes because there's snow on those mountains and it's August. It's bad. It's an identity hit. You're no longer the expert canoeer. You're a dude who carries luggage. And you're now in uncharted territory and you're lost. So what's the mission? What's the most important thing that we are going to keep in front of us? So we have an entire exercise that we teach people how to do. What's the mountains? What is the changing world? What are the canoes? Everybody wants to solve problems inside the church. When we do surveys and stuff, people will tell us that this is what will make us happy. And we say, good, let them say that. And then what you have to do is know that data is not discernment. Right? Numbers are not the sign of the Spirit. Data is not discernment. Discernment is where we take all of the data we have. And stories are just data with a soul, Brene Brown said, right? Just take all the input we have and ask ourselves, what then are we called to do? What's our reason for being? What's our purpose? These are bigger things. What are the underlying issues we need to address because it fits our purpose? We have this little process that we go through. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I want you to see this piece because it requires that spirit of adventure. The spirit of adventure that requires learning and it results in loss. You're going to have to drop canoes. You're going to ask what got us here isn't going to take us here. The Wesley Choir was awesome. It's not going to be the next thing we use. Right? This program got us here. It's not going to take us here. That men's breakfast was amazing. We got a whole group of younger men who are interested in something else. What got us here is not going to take us there. We're going to have to ask, what's the canoe? What's the loss? What's the thing we're going to face? What do we have to drop? And it's really hard because all of us have stuff that like this church, what this matters to me is this thing. And figuring out how to hold on to this thing that is bigger than us. So we basically have this process. I'll pull this to one more conversation, we'll be done. We basically have this process that we do, this adaptive change process. And it's in the little green book. But it basically goes like this. We ask two questions. We have two questions we put before you all the time. How might the charism of our church, we'll use that phrase, address the pain point of our community? And how might that inspire us to faithfully change and grow? How might the charism of our church address the pain points of our community as an expression of God's mission in the world? And how might that inspire us to faithfully change and grow? As soon as we get clear on it's the world out there that is changing and people are experiencing the pain of that world, and we are here to meet that need. But to meet that need as we are, that's our charism. Charism is our gift, our values. It's who we are. It starts with being the healthiest version of yourself. I tell people all the time, God's not interested in you being something else other than yourself. The old rabbinic tale is, when God judges you, he won't ask you why you weren't Moses. He'll ask you why you weren't you. You already had a Moses. So you start asking these questions like, so if we know what's really unique about Wayne Presbyterian Church, we know what we're really gifted at, what we care about, what makes us unique, and we have a whole process that we teach people of how to do that is not built on sitting around going, so what makes us really great? It's actually built on bringing people together to tell stories about when they were most proud of the church, what they loved about the church, the heroes of the church. And from those values, from those stories, you get your values, and from those values, you get your charism. This is what makes us unique. This church, this multi-ethnic church, when they told stories, they said the stories they were told said we knew we were a church that cared about our neighbors because every story was told about someone who welcomed a neighbor, brought a neighbor, loved a neighbor. That's who we are. We're a church that loves our neighborhood. And we stopped loving our neighbors because our neighbors started being different than us. Once we got back our gift, our charism, we're a neighborhood church. We wanted to be a regional church. We wanted to be a big church, a mega church. Instead, we said if we can instead be a missional church instead of a mega church, we won't worry about how big we are. We'll worry about, are we living out our mission? That's our charism. What's the pain point? A whole bunch of immigrants who moved here who don't have a sense of community. Their neighborhood is mostly Southeast Asian. It's mostly Indian and Muslim. They said, we're Christians and we got to figure out how do we welcome these folks who come as Hindus and Muslims into this area? How do we love these people who have come to this country, many of them on different immigrant status, and care about them? This is the thing that gets me not invited back to churches in the South. This little factoid. The United States is in decline spiritually. We know that religiously. It's in decline. It's not in decline as fast as Europe. Europe is declining faster. The number one reason why the United States is not in decline as fast as Europe is immigration. Christians come to this country. All the people we're locking out, most of them are Christians. Now, if this doesn't mess and create a competing value within you, I don't know what does. It does me. I actually think my country needs to have sovereign borders, and I believe in all that stuff. But all those Syrian, African, Latin American, mostly they're Pentecostals, by the way. They're not Presbyterians. Pentecostals come to this country. So now what do we do about that? This church, this is a conservative Bible church, said, whoever God brings into our neighborhood, we're going to welcome them. And it's going to require us to change. Right? The change, that's our transformation. That's the underlying issue we're going to address. That's what we're going to face. And so the more we get clear on talking to and understanding the pain of our neighbors, the more the internal changes get energy. We will change internally for God's mission externally. Okay. One last time around the table, we're going to be finished. I want to give you one last time just to respond. I want you to just think about what I've said. What are we going to have to change internally for our church's charism to be an expression of God's mission outwardly toward the pain of our community? What questions does that raise for you? Inspire, inquire, irk, require. What is it would require you? What underlying challenges? You'll notice this is probably the same thing that will help you start a new curve. What's the need of the changing world around us that requires us the new idea? So I want you to just respond to that for a few minutes, and then I'll just finish this up, and we'll have one last thought before we're done. Okay? Just talk around your table. You can use the same quote, the prompts that I've been giving you. Once you get clear on that we have to get really clear on who we are, our charism, where the need is in our community, and then how might that change us. Dallas Willard says that spiritual formation is you becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. It's not you becoming like Jesus. I keep thinking, how do I become a 33-year-old Palestinian Jew? I don't know. I'm a 60-year-old with a big dog in New York City. But if Jesus was a 60-year-old with a cool wife and a big dog in New York City, what would he be doing? If Jesus was Wayne Presbyterian Church, we are the body of Christ, then what would he be doing? What would he be paying attention to? What would he be answering? It's not everything, right? This is a discernment question. One of the questions we often say is, when you spend time, and we got questions we can give you and things you can do, when you spend time talking about, when we work with people on go listen to your neighbors, what comes back is a lot of people have a lot of interesting things. And we say, so what's the thing that we think God might be calling us to do right now? How are we clear on that? Do we have a clear mission? Do we have a clear sense of our values? Do we have a clear sense of who we are? What is it that we can offer? Once we get clear on that, then we can start making decisions that are really focused. And those focused decisions begin to change us. This is the kind of church we want to be. Final Lewis and Clark story, it's one of my favorites. When they got to the top of the Lemhi Pass, they were lost. I mean, let's face it, they were totally lost. 28 guys, all trained literally with the most well-equipped military unit in history at that time, trained by the highest scientists and professionals they possibly could get. They were the most elite of elite folks, and they get to the top of the Lemhi Pass and they are lost. I mean, they knew less about the American West than Neil Armstrong knew about the moon. Neil Armstrong had seen pictures of the moon. They were lost. Everybody was lost. Everybody except one person. She was a teenage Native American nursing mother. In 11th grade history class, you learned her name is Sacagawea, but they actually wrote her name down as Sakakawea with K's sometime and G's. Her name was probably Sakagawea. I like to give her back her name. But what was powerful to me about it was when they got over the Lemhi Pass, these folks who were so formed by the old world had to learn to listen to somebody from the future. This is where they were going. And I think about this all the time. Every time you think about the Corps of Discovery and this amazing group of mountain men who, went down rivers and climbed mountains and faced grizzly bears and went through hordes of mosquitoes. Remember, she did it too, with a baby. She took them to the Shoshone. She was Shoshone. The Shoshone heard her translate and couldn't figure out where this woman had come from. And in the middle of their translation, they realized that their tribal chief was actually her brother. That she was the little girl they lost when she was 11 or 12, who they thought was dead. She'd been kidnapped, taken over the Lemhi Pass and kept as an enslaved person with the Mandan tribe in North Dakota. When Lewis and Clark heard that she spoke Shoshone, they hired her French trapper husband, Charbonneau, even though he was worthless, because they needed her. She took them to the Shoshone. When they realized these white folks had brought back this girl who he thought was dead, they generously let her go, and they gave an old experienced guide they called Old Toby, who guided them through the mountains. The Shoshone is how they made it through. One of the questions I want you to keep thinking about is, who are the people who we're not listening to yet? Who are the people right around us? Who are the people that we don't invite in, that we haven't thought about? Who are the Sacagaweas? Where are the places in the community? What are the conversations we can be having with others? Where are the young people? Instead of trying to do stuff for them, listen with them. Find the Sacagaweas. What's powerful about the story is it ends with them getting to the Lemhi Pass. They get through the Lemhi Pass and they get to the Pacific Ocean. And they get to the Pacific Ocean. And when they get there, there's this great exultation. They completed their task. And when they get there, they realize they can't make it back over the mountain. So they're going to have to make a fort. You can go there. It's in Oregon. It's called Fort Clatsop. They have to make a fort. And when they make a fort and they plant the flag, they literally at that moment are declaring, this is the United States of America. And as a military unit, they had the right to plant wherever they planted that flag would become America. They were the envoy of Thomas Jefferson. Boom. But Lewis and Clark, who had the military authority to plant that flag and make America in the New World with an incredibly American idea. They give everybody a vote. They gave everybody in the Corps of Discovery one vote. Should we put America here, closer to the ocean, or here on the other side of the river? We can't decide. You all vote. You're going to participate. You're actually going to make America. And everybody got a vote, including Sacagawea, and including York, William Clark's enslaved man. The first time that a woman, a Native American, or an African American had a vote in anything resembling a United States election was 100 years before everybody else caught up. Because they were in the future. Here's the question I want to leave you with today. We know the God of the future. We know the book. We know that a day is going to come when the kingdoms of this world are going to become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever and ever and ever. We know the future. So why is the church so afraid of the future? Why do we find ourselves always wanting to go back to the familiar? When Lewis and Clark got home and were welcomed as heroes, Meriwether Lewis got a writing contract. He got a book deal for his memoirs. And William Clark went back to his plantation. And Meriwether Lewis committed suicide under the pressure. And William Clark wrote to Meriwether Lewis and said, I had to beat York savagely because he had the audacity to ask to be sold to another master so he could be with his wife in the way that the other men were with theirs. He forgot who he was. When they went back to the worst version of themselves. What I want you to think about is this. When Thomas Jefferson was asked, why could Meriwether Lewis do such an amazing job of leading that incredible Corps of Discovery when everybody knew that he was an alcoholic who'd struggled with depression? His answer was, the travails of the expedition, the hardness of the expedition, probably kept the demons at bay. My theological response is, we are best when we are on mission. When we are doing change, not for ourselves, but for the mission God's given us, we are at our best. When we get to where we don't know, we say, I don't know. We don't try harder, we learn differently. We learn to say there's a difference between problems we can solve with our expertise and ones that are going to require learning. And we become a leadership team that gets really good at learning our way forward, doing experiments, capturing the learning, and always asking the question how what we are learning can make an impact upon our neighbors and our friends so we can continue to fulfill God's mission in the world. And as we fulfill that mission, we'll be changed internally. How might that require us to faithfully change and grow? That's how you climb a new curve. That need, the new idea that transforms us into the next season. And that's all I got to say. So there you go. All right.
Thanks, Todd.
You bet.